Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the Center for an Urban Future's second annual New York City Economic Opportunity Summit. I'm Jonathan Bowles, Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. It's great to see so many people here today. More than 500 people actually signed up for today's event, both in person and for the live stream. So thanks so much for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to Robinhood for supporting today's event. Yes, give it up for Robinhood. You know, most of CUF's policy reports and forums are focused on advancing a specific opportunity or idea, such as expanding access to tech careers, boosting college and career success for CUNY students, supporting low-income entrepreneurs, harnessing the city's branch libraries, scaling up effective workforce training programs, or increasing apprenticeship opportunities in high-wage industries. But the individual reports and policy events we produce are part of a bigger mission for CUF, the need to make real progress around economic mobility in New York. It's why we started this annual summit last year, to bring a new level of discussion around the policies and investments that can be implemented locally to ensure a lot more New Yorkers are able to exit poverty and climb into the middle class. This year, our summit is zooming in on a particularly urgent set of issues: how to advance economic mobility at a time when there has been an unprecedented wave of federal attacks on anti-poverty programs, attacks that are threatening the safety net that millions of New Yorkers rely on and undercutting the city's efforts to expand economic mobility. These harmful federal actions have come when an unprecedented number of New Yorkers are already struggling to make ends meet, and when way too few are managing to get ahead. Indeed, at the start of this year, even before recent federal actions, the city's poverty rate was an alarming 25%, according to Robinhood. To meet this moment, city and state leaders will need to respond with bold policies and strategic investments that not only protect the safety net, but also safeguard and expand the programs that help New Yorkers exit poverty and achieve upward mobility. It's also going to require policy innovation, new financing mechanisms, and creative public-private partnerships to fill the gaps left by Washington. Today's event is all about teeing up ideas, solutions that can be implemented locally, including by our next mayor. We have some amazing speakers to help us delve into these issues, including SUNY Chancellor John King and former Deputy Mayors Mark Shaw, Tony Shores, Melanie Hartzog, and Richard Bury. Thanks for all of them and many more great speakers we have on tap today for being here. And in addition to the fireside chats and panel discussions we'll have, throughout the morning you'll hear from CUF staff who will be delivering 5 3-minute idea pitches, briefly outlining the policy ideas from a new Center for an Urban Future report that we're publishing this morning, titled 5 Ideas to Advance Economic Mobility in New York Amid Harmful Policies. Before we move forward with the first part of our event today, I want to thank Robinhood again for their generous support for today's event and for the hugely impactful work they are doing to reduce poverty in New York. Thanks also to the many foundations and individuals who support CUF's work, including the Clark Foundation and the Altman Foundation, 2 longtime general operating supporters of the organization. Finally, a super big thank you to CUF's amazing staff. Give it up for CUF staff, please. I'm really happy you'll be hearing from 5 different CUF staff members today. You'll be sharing our ideas. But now it's my great pleasure to turn it over to our next speaker. And let me introduce Matt Klein, the Chief Program and Impact Officer at Robinhood. And as you all know in this room, I think one of the city's most innovative thinkers and doers when it comes to policies for reducing poverty in New York. Matt?
Thank you, Jonathan. And really thanks to the team at the Center for an Urban Future for organizing today's important convening. And I want to thank all of you also who are participating both in the room and online. And I was slipped a note beforehand with very important information about Wi-Fi. So let me share first the Wi-Fi, given we're talking about online. I think it's the guest network, Rubin-guest, and the password looks like welcome with a capital W2, number 2, the Rubin. So if you're looking for, I think I got that right. CUF can make that clearer if necessary. But it's good to be in the room with all of you, to be together with all of you, to be part of the large community in New York City that really does care about this question, that is dedicated to this idea that New York City can and should be a place of genuine opportunity for all. Be a place where upward mobility shouldn't mean beating the odds, that where you start out shouldn't predict where you end up. And all of us are here because we do have that aspiration for New York City. And we work for it. And it's hard work all the time. But I don't need to tell you that it's especially hard these days in the conditions in which we're operating at this moment. And so I'm grateful to CUF for organizing this now annual event. It provides an opportunity for us as a community to come together through better times and more difficult times to focus on this shared aspiration. And to do it in a way that characterizes all of CUF's work, drawing on research and evidence and imagination, elevating ideas and programs that work, but also new ideas, things to be tested and tried. Robin Hood's been proud to partner with CUF a number of ways in recent years to examine and elevate areas where policymakers can support programs that work. That's included projects to highlight effective programs at CUNY that improve college and career success, like ASAP and ACE, and to identify ways that we can improve computing education in K through 12. CUF's an invaluable resource for New York City with deep knowledge and savvy, and a commitment to using rigorous evidence-based analysis to advance real-world solutions. We're always so pleased to be able to partner with CUF. So thank you again to CUF and to all of the leaders and the organizations in this room who work every day, every year, to advance economic mobility and expand opportunities for our fellow New Yorkers. It's good to be in community with you, and so let's get to it. It's my pleasure to turn things over now to Eli Dvorkin, who will be having a fireside chat with one of my personal heroes, SUNY chancellor and Robin Hood board member John King. I've learned so much from John over the years, just observing him, having a chance to talk to him, just listening to him. And with the news out of DC yesterday, permitting the dismantling of one of the key parts of the infrastructure of opportunity in this country, the Department of Education, the agency that John previously led, I can't think of anyone better to start the day helping us to think about how we chart our course here in New York City. So please welcome Eli and Chancellor King. Thank you.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. Let me make sure you can hear us okay. How's that? All right. Good morning, Chancellor. It is my great honor to be joined this morning by SUNY Chancellor John B. King, Jr. Prior to leading the nation's largest system of public higher education, Chancellor King served as the 10th U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration and as president of the Education Trust. And he is, of course, a very proud Brooklynite. So join me again, please, in one more round of applause for Chancellor King. And as Matt said, we are really so honored to be here with you today. None of us could think of somebody better to help us navigate these choppy waters and think through how New York State and New York City can continue to lead on economic mobility despite what feels like the entire federal government sometimes rowing the opposite direction. So I wanted to start with this. I mean, SUNY and CUNY have become now more than ever, leading national engines of economic mobility, helping thousands, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers move from low-income backgrounds into the middle class. And that work continues now despite what may be happening in Washington. But it seems to all of us in the room, I think, that it's gotten a little more challenging. So we wanted to start, Chancellor, by asking you about what specifically makes the economic mobility mission of SUNY and of CUNY, and I should say Chancellor Matos Rodriguez is unfortunately not able to join us today. He was called to a hearing in Washington that was rescheduled for this morning, so he very much it will be missed. And I will direct all of my hardest-hitting CUNY questions, to you, Chancellor. But knowing that both of these institutions play this absolutely essential role as economic mobility engines, what do you see as the most difficult headwinds you're facing right now when it comes to federal policies or budget changes? What's at risk?
I mean, that's a very long answer, but look, I'd say I'd highlight a few things. One, this mega bill, we'll call it, has provisions that are going to threaten state budgets all across the country. Certainly will be true in New York. The huge Medicaid cuts will have a direct impact on the state's ability to make investments in everything else that matters for economic mobility. And that's a threat to public higher education in the state. We've gotten tremendous investment from Governor Hochul and the legislature over the last 3 years, and that will now be in jeopardy in budgets going forward because of the pressures created by the cuts to Medicaid as well as the cuts to SNAP. So that's one major threat. A second major threat is the president has proposed significant cuts to the Pell Grant program. This is the primary source of direct federal financial support for students to go to college. For us at SUNY, it's about half of our entering students who rely on Pell Grants. For CUNY, even higher. And so if those cuts were adopted by Congress, that'd be a disaster for SUNY, for CUNY, for public higher education, for all higher education. A third major issue is the attack on research. And that will take longer to have a direct impact on people's day-to-day lives, but there are researchers at SUNY, at CUNY, across the country who are working on better treatments for cancer, for Alzheimer's. We have a project at Stony Brook University within the SUNY system focused on the treatment of 9/11 first responders. All of that is under threat because of the federal efforts to cut research spending and the president's proposals for draconian cuts to NIH, NSF, all the things that help us to improve the quality of life of Americans and also drive economic innovation. So that's a huge threat. And then the last one that I would mention is what's happening with international students as well as undocumented students. We should have, as a strategy as a country, getting the best talent in the world here. That is what has helped us to drive our innovation economy for decades. And yet all of that is under attack, whether it's the ability of international students to get visas, the actions taken against undocumented students, even in higher ed institutions. It's very dangerous, and it has the risk of undermining a huge advantage that the United States has over our international competitors. We've been the place that the best students want to come to, but now what we're seeing is Canadian universities, European universities, saying to folks, why go to the United States? They're hostile to international students. Come here instead. And also saying they're hostile to research. Come here instead. So I'm worried we're going to lose, for example, folks who are focused on climate science to these other countries. And it's very dangerous to our long-term economic well-being.
Well, that's a sobering diagnosis, Chancellor, but
Yeah.
I'd like to
Good morning, everybody.
And we will get to some good news, I promise. But I do want to drill down into those key pieces that you just laid out for us. And I'd like to maybe actually start with the budget. But the piece that you mentioned, the really severe cuts to social safety net programs, including Medicaid and food assistance, clearly will have a major impact on the state's budget, a multi-billion-dollar impact, and on the city's budget as well. But it strikes me that there's a potential other impact there, which is that so many of our public college and university students themselves are food insecure, are housing insecure, are getting their health insurance from Medicaid today. For instance, half of all CUNY students, receive health insurance through Medicaid. What is your assessment of the risks of economic mobility progress in our public colleges and universities if more of our students are now going to be experiencing insecurity, just accessing support for their basic needs? And what can the state do to help change that?
Look, I think the very dark reality is it's going to make life worse for a lot of our students. Students will lose health care. They'll have family members who lose health care. That will have a devastating impact on people's day-to-day well-being, but also on their economic position. If you're a student who relies in part on family members for financial support, but those family members can't access health care, can't stay at work, then the whole family is thrust into much more dire economic circumstances. SNAP benefits are crucial. All of our campuses and CUNY campuses do food pantries. That is a Band-Aid solution. I'm glad we have them, but that's not a reliable, permanent source of support to address food insecurity. SNAP is, but without SNAP, we will have more students who are hungry. And students who are hungry, students who are sick, students who are underhoused, are not going to be able to succeed in school, and we will lose students. Students will drop out. So, there's no sugarcoating the stakes for our students and our families. And the sad reality is states and cities are not going to be able to make up for these losses. The dollar amounts in Medicaid and SNAP are just too big. And Blake Washington, the director of the Division of the Budget for New York State, has been very clear for months now. The state is not going to be able to close these gaps. And unfortunately, our congressional delegation failed to step up to protect their constituents.
Well, I'd like to ask a little bit more about what the state or municipalities in New York City, for instance, could do about this. And I get your point is well taken that the multi-billion-dollar holes that we're talking about are maybe impossible to fill. But I would like to push a little bit on, well, what can the state and the city do? And thoughts that certainly the strategy in many cases so far has been help more SUNY and CUNY students who are eligible for benefits and not receiving them to sign up and get them. And in some ways that's been successful. But obviously that's not the solution to this moment that we're in. So what are some possibilities there? I think about opportunities to help address some of those needs at the college level where maybe even it's not going to resolve the issues that their families may be facing. Are there some thoughts you have about where the city and the state could step up to do more? Whether that's growing more food on SUNY campuses or helping to support more of the non-tuition costs that are these barriers in other ways, relieving some cost pressures there even if they grow in other places, or if part of what happens with Medicaid is with food assistance are new work requirements. Well, for students who are enrolled at SUNY, potentially they would meet those requirements, but there's a huge bureaucratic burden there. Is there something the state should be doing? I'd just love your thoughts about, no matter how difficult this gets, what should we do to help?
Yeah, a couple things. Look, certainly the work requirements really are designed to be a bureaucratic barrier to people getting health care, right? The cynical reality of the work requirements is they're not really intended to increase the number of people who are working. We have really good evidence from states that have put those in place. It doesn't change who's working. What it does is result in people who forgot to fill out the form this month losing their health care. And so, yes, the state and the city can work with community-based organizations and higher ed institutions to figure out how do we help people navigate the blizzard of forms and bureaucratic hurdles that will be created by the Medicaid work requirements. There are other elements of the mega bill that have a similar strategy. Add unnecessary bureaucratic burden in order to reduce the number of people who receive the benefit. So yes, helping folks navigate those, that would be a good policy effort, but I think we don't want to overpromise on how much that will protect people from the harm. A second area is accelerating our efforts that we're talking about this morning around economic mobility, right? That there are lots of folks who, if they could complete even a short-term workforce development program, their lives would be better and they would be less in need of public assistance. We ought to do everything we can to accelerate those efforts. I don't know that we're going to be able to outpace the harm that will be done by this bill, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of open jobs in this state where people don't have the skills that match those jobs. We should double down on our efforts to fix that problem.
Well, I love that as a segue into some potential solutions, Chancellor, and let me ask you about one of them. And I promised we'd get to some good news, or as close as we can in our circumstances. It seems like one of the bright spots, one of the very few potentially in this mega bill, is the inclusion of federal Pell dollars for workforce programs. This was struck and then it came back in late in the game. It initially applied to both for-profit and nonprofit colleges. The for-profit colleges were taken out. The rulemaking still needs to be done, and that's a whole process that will ensue over the next several months. But I wanted to ask you about this, given what you were just saying about where we should be focused around potentially short-term non-degree programs with good outcomes that help New Yorkers get into good jobs. And we're fortunate as a state and as a city to have many of those programs. But for the most part, those are programs that New Yorkers pay for out of pocket. So I wanted to ask you about this. How big an opportunity is the inclusion of Pell Grants for workforce programs? Maybe even less known by some New Yorkers is that the state already has a version of this, workforce TAP. But I think potentially the fact that not a lot of New Yorkers even know about it suggests that there's more to be done to kind of figure out how do we maximize this opportunity. So I'd love to get your take on, is this a good thing for New York? And what can the state do to maximize the benefits of having both federal and state dollars that can be used to pay for workforce programs?
Yeah. So the good news is I think there are a lot of opportunities. And certainly our community colleges at SUNY, the CUNY community colleges already have a lot of these short-term workforce programs in place, many of which have strong outcomes. And so if we see this as an opportunity to scale those, I think that's a good news, a rare piece of good news in this mega bill. However, while they took out institutions that are unaccredited, the for-profits that are accredited are still in there. And so one of the risks with Workforce Pell is that predatory for-profit institutions will out-advertise the public institutions. It's already a problem. If you Google most workforce programs today, the first things that are going to come up are for-profits that charge a lot. And you're going to have to go pretty far down the list before you get to free programs at CUNY, at SUNY, at our EOCs throughout the state that we have in every city that offers free programs, literally free, totally free programs for folks to do things like train as a CNA or do OSHA training for free. And yet there are people who are charging for those very same things and taking advantage of folks. So one worry I have is, will public institutions be nimble enough to build these short-term workforce programs and communicate about them to the public so that folks know there are those opportunities? So that's on us and on CUNY. We have to hustle to make sure that our institutions compete there. Another risk is that we don't have great data on short-term programs. There's some evidence to suggest that maybe half of these short-term credential programs really help economically, and half really don't. So one of the things we're building at SUNY is a data system for our, what we describe as non-credit workforce development programs, so that we can track look, we want to know if people come and do this short-term program, does their economic position improve in the short term? And then over the long term, do they come back? Do they finish a degree? Are they able to advance in the workplace? We don't have great evidence on that. That's something we need to build. And then ideally, and this is a risk given what's happening at the education department, ideally there would be accountability infrastructure that would say you only get the short-term Pell if the programs actually lead to demonstrably better outcomes for people. And I worry, given the threats to the education department, that we won't end up with that kind of infrastructure.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think putting some specifics on the table for state and city policymakers as well to prepare if these policy changes are really happening, there's infrastructure we need to help CUNY and SUNY build to be able to take advantage. There are some for-profit programs, just to push back a little bit, that do have good outcomes, and there's others that don't. There's some public programs, as you said, that also struggle, at least even demonstrate their outcomes. So there is a huge gap of knowledge, and I think policymakers feel this, elected officials as well, around what actually works. But I guess I want to ask you a little bit more about that. And this also, I promised we'd get into some good news, you know, to kind of talk a little bit more about, well,
I'll try harder.
What do we, no, you're doing an excellent job. But what do we know works? I mean, we know in general that a college degree works. In New York City in particular, in New York State with an increasingly knowledge-driven economy. But what works when it comes to actually helping New Yorkers gain those credentials that unlock economic mobility? And by that I mean, what are the key barriers that you see to enabling more low-income New Yorkers to attend a SUNY or a CUNY school, to actually earn a degree, and not only that, but to enter into the workforce, into a role that will pay them a family-sustaining wage? What are the pieces that work right now? And I ask this in part to say, where should the city and the state focus their efforts? If we know that we can't plug all the holes, what's working that is in our control?
Yeah. Well, the good news is SUNY and CUNY, I think, are one of the most important drivers of economic mobility in the state today. Both institutions serve a tremendous number of low-income students, first-gen students, and provide a pathway that is not only life-changing for students, but for their families for generations. So part of the good news is we already have these tremendous assets. Two, we know what gets in the way for students and how to overcome it. Matt mentioned ASAP and ACE. You know, ASAP and ACE are programs that were initially launched at CUNY, have now been replicated around the country. We are replicating them at SUNY. We had 25 campuses that were doing ASAP and ACE this year. Next year, this coming academic year, will grow to 34 campuses. These are programs that provide intensive advising, wraparound support, emergency financial assistance, help with transportation, a cohort experience, and have been shown in randomized controlled trials to nearly double completion rates for vulnerable community college students, and have shown very positive impact on retention and completion in the four-year programs. That's the ACE program. And both ASAP and ACE have also shown evidence of positive impact on earnings years out. So these are gold standard interventions that were first developed in New York that we ought to be growing even more quickly. And you know, I appreciate the governor and the legislature investing in making those programs permanent and helping us to expand them at SUNY. But both the city and state should be doubling down on those kinds of supports. And also thinking about how do we scale some of the supports that are embedded in ASAP and ACE for all students. Advising is a huge challenge in higher education. Better advising, having somebody, you know, it's really what we all want to do for our own kids. It's having somebody who reaches out and says, hey, you didn't do that well on the midterm, what's your plan? Right? The conversation that, again, we would all want to have with our kids. Have you been to office hours? Have you been to the writing center? Do you have a study group? What's your strategy? Right? And we know that that kind of advising works. We should scale that. We know that transfer can be great if you successfully transfer from the two-year institution to the four-year institution and complete. Unfortunately, we also know while 80% of community college students say they want a four-year degree, less than 20% will earn a four-year degree. So we have this gap. We know that there are policies that make transfer work better, like when a student begins at the community college, having a degree map that helps them see what classes do I need to take now and how will that translate into the four-year institution. So making transfer work better is a tool that is available to us, and we all need to work on that.
Well, I love those specifics, and I'd like to even maybe ask more about some of the steps that you think the city and the state should take. But I want to ask about one other element of what the city and the state are undertaking right now, and it's in recognition of the fact that a college credential still confers such significant economic mobility benefits in New York, an additional 1.6 or $1.7 million in lifetime earnings for a New Yorker with a bachelor's degree versus one with a high school diploma. One of the things that the city has done and that the state is now helping to kind of accelerate is helping more New Yorkers with some college credits but no degree to return and complete. CUNY launched the CUNY Reconnect program a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and now over 47,000 New York City residents with some college but no degree have come back to CUNY. Over 8,000 have earned degrees since that program started. And just in a few days ago, the governor, formally announced the expansion of a SUNY Reconnect initiative, really focused on community college in high growth, high demand fields, making that a completely free pathway for more New Yorkers. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the getting to college part of this. SUNY's also made some important steps in partnership with the governor and the legislature around making it easier for more New Yorkers to immediately gain access to a SUNY education. What do you see as important here when it comes to helping more New Yorkers, especially low-income New Yorkers, to get on the path to a college degree in the first place? And are there things that the state and the city should be looking at to accelerate this work?
Yeah, look, I think the key is to reduce barriers. And I think about that in three ways. One, there's a lot of financial aid available. Actually, the state recently expanded the tuition assistance program. There's a lot of financial aid available, but folks leave a lot of money on the table. In fact, on an annual basis, New Yorkers leave upwards of $200 million on the table of unclaimed federal financial aid, just federal, because of not completing the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. Often audiences wince at mention of the FAFSA, but there's been a lot of efforts to make the FAFSA simpler, and New York last year adopted a universal FAFSA law saying that K-12 institutions, our high schools, need to work with all students to make sure they've completed the FAFSA before they graduate. We're making progress. FAFSA completion is up over this same time last year, but we have a long way to go. And sadly, what you see is that FAFSA completion is higher in affluent communities than it is in low-income communities, which makes no sense except for the struggles in those low-income communities to get students the support they need to complete the FAFSA. Fewer counselors, parents who have less information about college. So we've got to work hard to make sure that students get the FAFSA done so they know what financial aid is available to them. We know that students who complete the FAFSA are significantly more likely to go on to college because they have that information. So FAFSA is one. Two is making the admissions process less opaque and less of a barrier. So one of the things we've done at SUNY is send a letter home to every high school senior saying, you're admitted. You're already admitted to your local community college. Now, all of our community colleges, SUNY and CUNY, are open admission institutions, but students don't necessarily know that and understand that. So getting the letter that with your name on it, dear Eli, there is a place for you. Scan this QR code, start picking your classes. Just taking out the, should I do the application, where should I apply, just making it direct admission, we think has a big impact on students' ability to access college. And we're continuing to think about additional ways to expand direct admission opportunities. For example, that if you're in the top 10% of your class in a set of pilot districts this year, you were automatically admitted to our more selective SUNY institutions. So again, you got a letter saying you don't have to do anything. Just scan this QR code, start the process of figuring out what you're going to do when you get here. We need to do more of that. So FAFSA, direct admission. The third is, I do think the messaging is really important, and the governor's Reconnect initiative says, if you're an adult 25 to 55, we're going to provide you with free community college, meaning no tuition, no cost for fees, no cost for books, no cost for supplies. It's in 4 sort of high-demand areas, IT and cybersecurity, green jobs and renewable energy, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing, including the semiconductor industry. We've gotten a ton of interest in this, as I know CUNY has as well, and part of it is just the simplicity of the message. The reality is, for many students, it was already free because the Pell Grant program would cover all of that. But you have to have a lot of information to know that. But to be able to say, this is free, just come and take advantage of this opportunity, that can be life-changing for folks, and we're really excited about the number of adult learners that we will be able to serve because of that initiative.
That's really great. Well, I'm glad we've been able to dig up a few bright spots here in this conversation. And I'm actually going to ask about one more, which is the incredible role that SUNY and CUNY play in educating our future teachers. And I know this is a topic you feel really passionately about, the value of great teachers in our society. You know, I want to ask a specific question here, which is, we know that a significant share of all of our future public school K through 12 teachers in New York City and across the state are educated at CUNY and SUNY. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, in some ways it feels like the ultimate virtuous cycle. If we are developing really exceptional K through 12 educators, the students who come into SUNY and come into CUNY have been prepared by those amazing K through 12 teachers, they're going to be ready for college, they're going to be best positioned to succeed. It strikes me as a major opportunity to strengthen that economic mobility engine. But what should we be doing to realize that opportunity? When it comes to the role of our higher education institutions in preparing our future teaching workforce, are there opportunities you see? Are there things that you see, having previously led the Department of Education, thinking about the whole pathway from kindergarten through college? What should we be doing to invest in our future teachers? What role would you like to see the state or the city play in strengthening CUNY and SUNY's ability to do that? We've written, for instance, in New York City about the CUNY SITE program, which is training future educators to integrate computational thinking into K through 12 classrooms. But is it that, or are there other things? What would you like to see the city and the state do to support that work?
Sure. So I'll start with one bright spot and then some things that we should do from a policy perspective. One bright spot is we really have now, I think, a statewide commitment to improve the teaching of reading, to leverage the best research about what's sometimes referred to as the science of reading, what we know about how the human brain works and what we can do to help students become better readers, including helping students learn to decode, as well as helping to build their background knowledge and vocabulary. So New York City, for example, is doing a lot of work on curriculum in K-12 schools around science of reading. CUNY and SUNY is the largest preparers of teachers. We have a responsibility to make sure that teachers are trained in the science of reading. We launched an initiative at SUNY New Paltz, a micro-credential program for current teachers so that they could get training on science of reading that maybe they didn't get in their initial teacher preparation. And we've had thousands of teachers in New York and around the country take advantage of this micro-credential. We're excited about that work. And we're excited about helping all of our teacher prep programs really embed the science of reading in what they provide. So making teacher prep better and better matched to the best research on how students learn, I think is a moral responsibility that we and CUNY have, and when we're working on that. So that's one bright spot. Some policy recommendations, things I've been working on for a long time, but have not yet gotten the traction that we need. We know that residency programs where folks are in classrooms longer before they become teachers have better outcomes, not only in terms of teachers' effectiveness in the classroom, but their likelihood of staying. I'll give you one example. When I was secretary, I visited a teacher prep program in Louisiana. Some of the students had done a residency, so spent the full year in their student teaching classroom, and other students had done traditional spring student teaching. And one young man who was a first-year teacher who had done the residency, he said, "I'll tell you why residencies are better. I knew what September should look like." Now, I don't know if we have any elementary school teachers in the audience here? Anyone who taught elementary school? Okay. Now, you know the whole game is September, right? That's when you teach the routines and the habits and how we do things here. And if September's a mess, it's going to be a tough year. But if you do student teaching for a few weeks in the spring, you never get to see September, right? The routines are already established in the classroom that you're spending time in, so you don't know what that looks like. But in a residency program, you get to watch an experienced teacher create those routines. And so residency programs, I think, are a tremendous opportunity. There are creative ways to do them. We've got some apprenticeship programs we're doing at SUNY where we're able to pay folks for that residency year. There are creative strategies to think about para-professional positions as an opportunity to create residencies. But we ought to invest in preparation for teachers that looks more like preparation for doctors, right? If your surgeon said, "Yeah, I spent, 12 weeks or so, I watched it happen, and a couple weeks I actually did some surgery," come on in, you'd be a little nervous. So the residency model, I think, would be very helpful. A second thing is we should make it free for folks to become a teacher. If you commit to teach for 5 years in a high-needs community or in a high-needs subject area where we desperately need teachers, we need physics teachers, we need bilingual teachers, we need teachers of students with disabilities. If you make that commitment, we should make your higher education free. Now, if we did that, it would change, I think, folks' thinking about becoming a teacher. Because now part of what intimidates people is they think, well, I've got to spend all this money, maybe borrow a bunch of money, and then I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to make an okay salary in New York State, but not amazing. And then I'm going to be saddled with this debt that I have to manage. We should take that off the table by making the commitment that if you, sort of like the GI Bill, if you make this commitment to serve the country in this way, we're going to pay for your education. So I do think if we did the residency and that kind of free teacher preparation, we could dramatically change the shortages that we're struggling with.
That's really helpful and hopeful. And I want to ask you then, building off of that, because you've now articulated a real vision for the beginning of the pipeline, the pathway, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the other side of the pathway, earning that degree from SUNY or from CUNY, and actually getting a good job on the other end of it. And it strikes me that one of the other impacts of the shifts that we've seen at the federal level isn't on the budget. It isn't necessarily even on federal policy. It's a climate shift around the retreat from commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a real shift in the mindset that some employers have around partnering with our higher education institutions and our workforce development organizations. What can the state and the city do, if you agree that that's a real threat, to actually ensure that more of those low-income students who earn, maybe the first in their families to earn a degree from a SUNY or a CUNY, actually get a good job on the other side of it? What's the work of the state and the city to help strengthen the career outcomes for our public college students?
Yeah, look, to go back to your first question about the mega bill, one provision that's in there that I think is interesting and could have an interesting impact on the question you're now raising is a provision that says if you participate in an undergraduate program that has lower earnings than what folks would earn with just a high school diploma for multiple years, you won't be able to use student loans for that program. Now, it's an accountability mechanism, but basically is to say an undergraduate degree better lead to a better job than just a high school diploma. And I think we should embrace that accountability and take seriously the expectation that families and students rightly have that a college degree is going to have a positive economic impact for them. Now, there's complicated nuances to how you make that accountability mechanism work, and I don't want to understate those, but the general principle that college education should lead to a good job, I think, is right. There are a few things that we should do. One, we've committed to a goal at SUNY of an internship for every SUNY undergraduate. We have a long way to go to get there, but thanks to Governor Hochul and the legislature, we've had real investment that we are leveraging to provide paid internship experiences for students, to cover things like transportation and childcare for students during their internship experience. That work on internships, I think, increases the likelihood, we know from the evidence, increases the likelihood that students will get a good job after they graduate. And I often point out to our faculty, the internships are most important not for the engineering students, they're all getting jobs, but for the students in the humanities and the social sciences who really need more help figuring out how am I going to turn my sociology degree into a good job when I graduate. So that internship agenda is one piece. Getting employers, and this is a role that I think, importantly, the next mayor should play, getting employers to see higher ed institutions in their community as their partners in preparing the workforce they need, and pushing them, inspiring them to commit to the internship opportunities for students. And it's a thing that's easier for big employers. So one of the things we're working on is working with local chambers to serve as intermediaries to help small and medium-sized businesses take interns. It's scary to take an intern. You have to have a plan for what to do with them. You have to know how to talk to a 19-year-old. There's for a small business that has 10 employees, that may be an unfamiliar thing, but if the local chamber can provide some support, some training, help you map out what the intern will do, manage the process of selecting the intern, it can lower the barrier for small businesses to participate. So that's something we're working on. I think the city and state could help us to lead on that. Last thing I'll mention is there's some responsibility for the higher ed institutions to look at our programs. And we just had a president's meeting, and we looked at which of our programs might be flagged by this new federal accountability provision. And one of the things you have to ask about those programs is, are they designed in ways that are going to match what employers need? And in some cases, just changing in modest ways the course content, the course design, can actually make a program much better matched to what employers need, and therefore positive economic outcomes for students. So that, I think, is an area where higher ed institutions should be leading.
Well, I wanted to ask you about something you just brought up a second ago. You had an idea for the next mayor of New York City. And I'd like to ask you if you have maybe one more, thinking about if whoever that may be, come January, were to come to you and say, Chancellor King, what should I do to expand economic mobility through CUNY? What would your recommendation be?
A couple things. One is, I think, expanding the reach of ASAP and ACE. We just have so much evidence that these programs produce more graduates. There is a cost, but actually the cost per graduate is lower than non-ASAP ACE students. So making an investment there, I think, is in the city's interest. Two, I would say, what we're doing around these high-demand workforce areas, making community college free for 25 to 55-year-olds, we should expand on that and start to think about other areas in the workforce. If we could do 25 to 55, why not 24? Why not 23? Right? That we start to build from there, and actually Massachusetts has shown over the last few years that you can grow community college enrollment, you can grow the number of graduates, you can start to tackle some of the workforce needs by expanding this free community college idea. The last thing I'd mention is actually K-12. If you talk to faculty at CUNY and SUNY, one of the things they worry most about is the level of preparation, or lack thereof, of the students they're getting. And Look, that's always been true. You know, you ask the third grade teacher, and they say, well, only if the second grade teacher had done a little more. And if you ask the kindergarten teacher, they say, if the pre-K had been better. So there's some of that is sort of endemic to education. But our academic performance as a country is below where it was before COVID. Chronic absenteeism is at epidemic proportions. And it worries me that in the mayoral campaign so far, there's been very little conversation about K-12 outcomes, right? It's really important to talk about K-12 outcomes, not just investment. I get everybody's for more money in K-12. I am too. But what I have not heard enough of from the candidates is clear, specific strategies for improving outcomes. And if we want students to come to CUNY and succeed or come to SUNY and succeed, we've got to make sure that their foundational reading, writing, math skills are better. We've got to figure out how do we get more kids to school. We see many, in the lower grades, many kids who are missing days, weeks of school. We also see that particularly at the high school level. Students who maybe they don't see why school is worth it. Maybe they don't see why school connects to them. We should be thinking about high school redesign in ways that make high school a more compelling place for students. But if we don't improve K-12 outcomes, it is very hard to achieve our long-term economic mobility goals.
Well, Chancellor, on that note, and you've given us all our marching orders, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Truly. I could really, truly talk to you all day long, but I'm grateful for the 45 minutes, and thank you again so much.
Thanks so much, and thanks to CUF for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you're not totally sick of me already, because I do want to share just a couple more minutes before we move on to the rest of our amazing program. And that's the first of 5 ideas from the Center for an Urban Future for expanding economic mobility amid these harmful federal policies. CityFEPS is now the largest municipal housing voucher program in the country, serving more than 50,000 households with an annual budget of over $1.1 million. It's a lifeline for New Yorkers experiencing or on the edge of homelessness, helping families exit shelter and afford rent. But while this massive investment is helping people stabilize their housing, it remains largely untapped as a tool for boosting long-term economic mobility. With the right supports, CityFEPS could do far more for the money, helping families not just find a place to live, but move to neighborhoods where their children are far more likely to thrive. Groundbreaking research by Harvard economist Raj Chetty and his colleagues shows that where a child grows up down to the block level has a huge impact on their future. Chetty's team found that every additional year that a child spends in a higher opportunity neighborhood improves their life outcomes, higher earnings at age 35, more college completion, lower incarceration rates. In New York, the map of opportunity looks like a checkerboard. Even a move of a few blocks can change a child's trajectory. Yet today, CityFEPS does little to guide families toward these higher opportunity areas. Most end up wherever they can find a landlord willing to take a voucher. To change this, the mayor and the city council should work together to adapt a promising pilot out of Seattle called Creating Moves to Opportunity that shows how a voucher system can be redesigned to maximize upward economic mobility. The key is navigators, trained housing specialists who work closely with families to identify higher opportunity neighborhoods using data tools that Raj and his team have built. These tools help those navigators identify available apartments in areas where outcomes are better. And those navigators can help their clients navigate the available listings, work with landlords, and cover upfront costs. In Seattle, families who worked with high-touch navigators were 5 times more likely to move to higher opportunity areas than those who received just basic support. New York can launch a pilot supporting 2,500 families at a cost of just $6.5 million, a tiny fraction of the current annual voucher budget. That modest investment could help ensure that more families are using city FEPs to move toward economic mobility. To be clear, this is just one piece of a broader economic mobility agenda. A city leader should also invest in making more neighborhoods places of opportunity by expanding access to early childhood education, improving parks and libraries, supporting community schools, and building more mixed-income housing. But right now, no strategy offers more potential for transformative, long-term impact at such a modest cost as adapting city FEPs to support moves to higher opportunity areas. City FEPs is already a vital support, but with a new direction, it could become one of New York's most powerful levers for economic mobility. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Nutchess, the data researcher at the Center for an Urban Future. Over the past 3 years, more than 47,000 mostly low-income working adults have re-enrolled at CUNY through the city's CUNY Reconnect initiative. It's clear that many New Yorkers understand that earning a college credential, no matter how long it takes, is still one of the surest ways to achieve upward mobility. But there's a major opportunity to help tens of thousands more New Yorkers get back on the path to a college degree. Today, more than 630,000 working-age adults across the 5 boroughs have some college credits but no degree. Many would like to return to school, but are blocked from doing so simply because they owe CUNY money. Financial challenges are the most common reason CUNY students leave college in the first place, and many withdraw with small balances that they can't afford to repay. These debts, often just a few $100s, prevent them from re-enrolling and finishing their degree. In 2024 alone, more than 15,000 enrolled CUNY students ended the semester with an unpaid balance that prevented them from registering for the next term. Most of these students owed $2,000 or less, and our research shows that even balances as low as $250 can stop someone from continuing their education. To address this barrier, city and state leaders should partner to launch CUNY Fresh Start, a new initiative that would eliminate unpaid balances of up to $1,000 for students who have started college but haven't finished. Establishing CUNY Fresh Start would not require a massive new investment. Just $10 million in funding could eliminate outstanding balances for about 10,000 New Yorkers. But with CUNY facing significant fiscal challenges, the university shouldn't be expected to fund this new economic mobility program on its own. One promising option to help cover the cost is by allowing modest infill housing development on CUNY campuses. With more than 80 acres of surface parking lots and 6 campuses over 40 acres in size, unlocking just a portion of this land could generate new revenue to fund Fresh Start and other economic mobility programs and help address the city's housing crisis at the same time. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Richard Bury. I'm the CEO of Robinhood, and it is great to be here today. I want to thank the Center for an Urban Future for having me and having us. All right. And I am really excited about this august panel. I think is a definition of public service up here. We have 3 former deputy, well, I guess 4, including me, 3 former deputy mayors here. Each of whom has had a broad career ranging from nonprofits to government to higher education to human services. It's hard to imagine a better panel to have this discussion. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. you so much. To my left is Tony Shores, who, everybody here has a long resume, so I'll say the most relevant for our purposes, but among other things, served as first deputy mayor under Bill de Blasio. We have Mel Hartzog, who, among other many amazing things, served as deputy mayor also under Bill de Blasio for Health and Human Services. And Mark Shaw, also a former first deputy mayor, who I did not have the chance to work with directly, but who I've long admired.
Only because I'm older.
So welcome all. So just to maybe start, the city obviously under each of your tenures has had to deal with a range of crises and challenges, sometimes man-made, sometimes natural disasters, sometimes the combination of the two. And I think in those moments is when leadership truly matters and when creativity really matters. We obviously as a city are facing some challenges now and probably a combination of those two. And I'm just curious if you could sort of thinking back from your experiences in city government, how do you, in those seats, from the deputy mayor seats, how did you think about how the city responds to crisis? What happens, what do you do, and what lessons do you have in that for the next administration that will be facing some serious crises, both political and financial in nature?
You want me to start? As the oldest in the room. Right. So, you know, for those of us that are involved in both the budget and the policy making that happens at City Hall and the interaction between the two, which is really important, and it's important to understand. But ever since the 75 fiscal crisis, the most important thing for a budget director or a deputy mayor in terms of running the city and giving advice to the mayor, especially when it's a new incoming mayor, is to reflect on the fiscal crisis and the lessons learned from the fiscal crisis. And probably the biggest lesson that was learned, aside from having as job number one your responsibility to have a fiscally responsible, balanced budget so that you don't lose the power to run the city, because there was for decades this control board that would take over, which meant the state. So that was, you know, rule number one. The second rule, and this was the result of thinking about how people came out of the fiscal crisis from 75, was there were tens of thousands of layoffs in order to balance the budget. And I think in retrospect, people came to the conclusion that was a big mistake. It cost decades to rebuild the infrastructure that was lost from that. And, you know, I hate to say this, but you're watching that play out at the federal government right now. And, you know, needless to say, I think it's a mistake, but we're going to witness the damage from it. But that was, to me, one of the most important things coming into a new administration for a new mayor to be thinking about.
I probably spent more time as budget director than deputy mayor, and I agree. I think, you know, the first time I was in government was during the Great Recession, and I was at a city agency, and we laid off half of my workforce at the time. So we went from, you know, 300 to 150 people, and it really did impact our ability to get work done and to turn on childcare for thousands of families. So I do think really thinking about, you know, your workforce is important. But I also think, you know, you have to really think about, you know, we took, in my time as budget director, we took down a lot of vacancies, and we pushed folks to be creative about the work that you do. And I think there's a lot of room for that. And I think in our time, I think I'm the only one, by the way, that's worked with all of you in government. Right? I think so, yeah. But I do think in our time, especially when I think about even with Tony on health and hospitals, and really looking to reform the public health system. And you remember that time where people were saying we should shut hospitals. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine if we shut hospitals in the middle of COVID? Right? And we did that, and we reformed public hospitals. And so I do think that there's a lot of room, and there's still a lot of room to be creative and efficient, and to not sacrifice the workforce, because it is going to take a lot. And it is frightening to see what's happening at the federal level. And how do you rebuild that? And now with the Department of Education, what they're doing, like just gutting it, what do you do then? So I agree.
So the advice I always give to people who are about to step into some executive office is to start with the crisis preparedness, because it can happen the first day. It happened to us on the first day. We had a huge snowstorm, it was very disabling, and readiness for crisis is sometimes an open book in the sense that the sort of four horsemen of disaster, we kind of know who they are. Climate-related, terrorism-related, plagues and other things that show up, or cyber. And we've all sort of seen versions of that, and we know it's coming, getting ready for that. But for this mayor, I think the crisis threat will be different. There is an economic crisis, as Mark laid out, that's coming, because the federal actions will trickle to the state, which will trickle to the city, and will show up directly in the city's budget, for sure. And those are very scary, and we all know what those are. And they have primary and secondary and tertiary impacts, all difficult. I actually don't even think that's the biggest crisis. I think the biggest crisis to begin thinking about now is the likelihood, the risk of disorder and division that a federal government may even seek to foster, if not allow. And that kind of division and disorder is really what underlay the city's greatest fiscal challenges in some other ways, because that was the story of the 60s and beyond. And that takes a long time to recover from and is very destructive. And I don't think we have a partner in that. It's beyond Ford's New York drop dead. This is way worse than that. So I think a mayor now has to not only begin thinking about cyber and plagues and all the usual other terrible things, certainly needs to understand the fiscal crisis, if we're not overusing that term, challenge that's going to come, but needs to be thinking about its relationship with the communities and the people who live in New York to make sure that that crisis of disorder and division that may be fostered and pushed on us, that we find some ways that we get to stand together and deal with that in a way that doesn't let it become destructive. So crisis management is a class I still teach at Princeton. I'm a big believer in getting ready for crisis, but I think this one could be very different than the other ones we've all dealt with.
Thank you for that.
Cheering you up?
Yes, thank you for that. If we could follow up on Tony's question, I mean, how would you two see, how would you define the crisis facing the city? And similarly, how would you then advise the mayor to respond to that crisis?
I mean, usually Tony can't out-depress me, but he just did. And I think it's real to be thinking about that kind of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, and it goes back to my earlier comment, the role of running the city and from the mayor on down is going to be how, no matter what the crisis is, how to deal with it. And the biggest tools you have to deal with it is the budget of the city of New York. And, there'll be times when you're going to have to make tough choices about what programs to cut, what programs not to cut, and where to get revenues from. And I think one of the potential solutions to what Tony's saying, and I'll probably get the crap beat out of me by the business community, is to, I think all New Yorkers and all New York City and New York State officials view that the cuts that we've been talking about that are happening, whether it's the Medicaid, all of the cuts that are coming down from the federal government, New York City can't just solve those problems fiscally with its existing resources. But one of the things to think about, and maybe groups like the Fiscal Policy Institute can start to do the analysis, but what the federal government did in terms of these cuts was, and increasing the deficit, but was to provide these massive tax breaks. And one of the good parts about New York and New York City and New York State is we are the home to amongst the richest people in the country. And they're going to be tremendous beneficiaries of those tax cuts. And there might be a possibility to have a dialogue and a debate about just a portion of that tax cut, not for it to go away, but a portion of that tax cut could become a revenue source to help deal with the city fiscal problems coming up.
So you would, and do you think that's likely, realistic in the local political environment?
I have no idea what it'll lead to. But I'm only recommending that it could be one of the things on the table to be part of the debate.
Mel, how would you answer that question? What would you define as a singular crisis the next administration is going to face?
I don't think it's a singular crisis. I think that, you know, Mark's right. The cuts that are coming down, the city can't absorb them, nor I think can the state, and they're pretty significant. I think the one thing that always happens, which is really unfortunate, is that the first thing to get cut is always social services. It happens every time, and the picking back up and trying to rebuild is always difficult, and it gets you further into the challenges, like I think of homelessness. And the first time around when we cut rental subsidies, and then how much that spiked the problem, and then you try to invest now, and it's become even more challenging, you know, and then you're dealing with street homelessness as well. I don't know that I necessarily have the answers on how to leverage those things or to deal with them, or, you know, that's the answer. But I do think it's also clear that you have to have a sense of what you're prioritizing. And I think if you don't have that, you know, it just becomes everything's on the chopping block, and then, you know, you come to the point where it's like, okay, we'll just do what the easiest thing to do, which is always, unfortunately, social services. But yeah, I don't, these cuts, I don't think, to Tony's point, like we've ever seen order of magnitude. And even in this current role, you know, half of my budget is Medicaid. And I have another $20+ million worth of Head Start funding that's directly contracted with the federal government. And my board is like, well, what are we going to do and how do we plan? And I'm like, there's no getting around this or contingency planning. If we get cut, we get cut. And you can't absorb those kind of cuts, right? I can't ask my board to turn around and say, like, hey, just invest $20 million. But the impact is devastating. We employ 500 people on the island of Puerto Rico. We're one of the largest employers. There's a ripple effect of cutting Head Start programs, and you can't make that up. So, you know, I don't have any easy answers to it. And I said the same thing to my board. Like, we're just going to have to really weather the storm for a couple of years. And then, you know, it's rebuilding. But the impact is significant.
I mean,
I don't know if any of these guys, what are the answers to it? Having gone through all of this, and even during the Great Recession, right? We got down to it and we had to do significant layoffs. It was massive. And the ripple effect of that, when you think about the way civil service law works and all the bumping that happened and of different people in different roles, like it really devastated government, I think. But there really was no choice in the end. What do you do?
I'm supporting Mark Shaw's tax increases, which is a rare thing for me to get to say. But look, I'm not as afraid of tax increases as some, and we've all had versions of tax increases that we've done for various reasons, whether it was post 9/11 or things we did back in my days in the Koch administration. But at the end of the day, I always teach kids in school, budgets are about choices and choices are about values. And when we make these decisions, we're making our values clear. And whether it's who's going to be punished by cutting in social services or cutting even in arts and cultural and other things, we're making our values clear. So I think the key that I would argue is first, there are things other than the budget that the mayor does control. And a very important thing, I think, for any mayor to do is to ensure there's alignment using all the levers that she or he may have. So that's personnel, right? The city hires probably close to 10% of the workforce in the entire city of New York, directly or indirectly. how we spend our money in our capital investments and our operating budget. We spend $125, $150 billion a year. But it's also how we use regulation and litigation and procurement. These are enormous levers that we have. They're not going to offset these budget cuts. I'm not kidding myself. But are they going to provide tools that help mitigate some aspects of it? Look what the city council did, yesterday, about the wages of the Instacart drivers, I think it was. These are small changes, but these are the kinds of changes that a lot of us have worked on along. Think about the first 4 years that some of us had together. Living wage bills, paid leave bills, hiking the minimum wage. These are tools that are not budgetary, but help offset pain. Now, there's no free lunches, right? Somebody pays for those. You raise the minimum wage, small businesses make less money, or they charge higher prices. Okay, we have to acknowledge that. But it does help mitigate the pain for people who are living on the margin, on that slippery slope that John King was talking about earlier, where one thing goes wrong and you're homeless. So I would look hard at all the tools that mayors have, from the law department to the DCAS people on hiring, to the regulatory constructs that we have, to ask how can we help mitigate some of this pain, in addition to probably coming up with additional revenue sources to offset some of the most direct cuts. Again, I do think the cultural crisis here is going to be deeper than the fiscal crisis, or is at risk of being deeper. And that's the one that is the most profound. But on the fiscal side, which we've all dealt with, sure, we have to look for revenue sources. Let's also look for non-revenue strategies.
How do those things connect? And I think it's probably universal. We're trying to get the mic. Are you hearing us okay?
Sorry.
You'll need the microphone closer.
Okay. I'll try and be more ominous.
No. I want to try to connect those two things together, because you're talking about both the challenges of a political argument about the importance of raising local taxes in an environment where the wealthiest maybe have had a tax break, creative uses of budget and non-budgetary tools, the importance of prioritization. I've heard from so many of you, like just the need to actually set clear priorities based on values. And all of those things take organizing, they take a shared willingness to sacrifice together, to plan together. I think all the things that you're talking about are very difficult, I think, in an environment where, as you say, there is deep social disconnectedness, where people don't trust each other, so how do those two things come together? Because it sounds like in order to do what you just described, one of the things the mayor, whether it's the new mayor or the current mayor, has to do is figure out how do you rally people together to do these big, difficult things together in a world where you're saying it's more difficult to get people together to agree on big, difficult things. So how do those two things tie together?
So I'll start, because I made the grimmest premise. I do think this is doable. I think it's doable. This is what leadership is. It's marshaling the energy of all of the government and all of the people around stuff. And when you are relentless about a single mission or a couple of missions, and you stick to it again and again, you can move the needle. Can we put up that picture that I wanted to show a picture of something? So when some of this crowd came into office, our focus was reducing inequality. And that's pretty nebulous and pretty big rock to roll up the hill. And after 4 or 5 years, inequality in New York actually changed in a meaningful way. You can move the needle. Now, is that because of massive additional public spending? Some additional public spending, sure. But it was also a change in the minimum wage. It was also pre-K. It was also 2 years of a rent freeze. It was also paid sick leave and paid family leave. You put those tools together, the official poverty rate in New York, I'm only citing Matt Klein research here, so I know it's got to be true, fell by about 20% over those first 4 or 5 years. 500,000 people left poverty into near poverty or near poverty into the middle class. That's change at scale. Now, was it because of enormous increases in spending? No, again, it was a good economic time. I don't kid myself, and it had very little to do with the Blasio administration. The economy was strong, et cetera. It was a good luck moment. But resources weren't infinite. There were no tax increases put in place. Property tax rates didn't go up. None of that changed. What changed was focus and drive. What changed was alignment around a mission of inequality. In that case, and mayors a lot of different missions. And what changed was a kind of relentless pursuit of this through every one of those mechanisms I just talked about. Litigation, regulation, personnel decisions, procurement, communications, recognition and celebration. And sure, better budget management's also part of it. If any commissioner that can't cut their budget by 2% without impacting services shouldn't be the commissioner. So there needs to be discipline, for sure, in the budget process. But at the end of the day, alignment drives change and can drive change at scale, even without massive new public resources. And that was the proof.
Boy, well, where were you when I was battling commissioners on 2% cuts?
Supporting them.
No, I agree with you. The other thing I would say is, we think of New York City's budget as being so big, and I know this is going to sound, but, on the margins, if you go from plan to plan, you're getting like $1 billion, $2 billion additional revenue. You still have to balance the budget. The gap could be, $5 billion? And so it's always on the margins, and the battle becomes about a very small amount of money relative to the overall budget. And that's, to your point, about it's not about adding all these additional spending. It's about, you've got this finite amount of additional revenue coming in, and you have to make tough choices. But I agree that that's the power of a strong city hall, right? When you've got a sense of the priorities, most certainly as budget director, it helped me in my pushback with commissioners around what are the clear priorities that the mayor has given that we have at City Hall that we're driving towards. And it's not just about the spending side of it. To Mark, to your point, a lot of what we do, and when I was on B, was policy, right? You're thinking about it from a much bigger perspective than numbers. It's about strategy. I would start off, strategizing in the November plan about where the trajectory is going to go through adoption and how do we manage all the different priorities and being able to meet some of the various commissioners, requests at the same time. But I do believe it is manageable. I think order of magnitude for certain, it's big. We're not going to be able to, simply cut our way out of this problem. We have to generate more revenue, but there's a lot of efficiencies to be found. And we're certainly sitting on this side. I have to say, perfect example, we have 6 contracts with one city agency, 6 individual contracts. Do you know how inefficient that is? It's just, and even with all of the great things that we talk about, passport and all of this, like the amount of time that my staff spend on line item budgeting, but at the end of the day, what you really care about is, did we impact the families and the communities? And have we shown you and demonstrated that? It's just nonsense, right? And so those little things, to your point, Tony, I agree, did I get it all when we were in our time of government? No, but there are certain things that you can do that aren't necessarily about, cutting, but you can make better. For sure.
And the other thing to add to the equation that we haven't discussed so far, but I think is one of the also really important parts for thinking through how to deal with this fiscal situation and social situation that we're embarked on, is New York City is part of New York State. And New York City and New York State, the more that they coordinate their efforts together, the better off New York will be. Because at the end of the day, we all learn our lessons from trying to deal with Albany, and I've dealt from the obnoxious Albany perspective down to the city and the other way around. You need to understand that relationship because the city is a creature of the state. And the city can't do almost anything without the permission or support of the state. And I think one of the things that's going to be important for New York to get through this next moment is to improve the relationship between the city and the state.
Just following up on that conversation, so social mobility, powerful slide that we had up there before, and certainly something that I'm very proud of having been a part of. What are some of the low cost, what are some other specific recommendations you would have around low cost, not budget busting investments that the next mayor could champion that would increase social mobility, reduce income inequality? If we don't have billions of dollars of new resources to spend, what's next on that list?
Well, the chancellor earlier talked about this before. I mean, ASAP is probably the most successful with ACE new program that's come along that, has been studied by policymakers and researchers and been shown to be incredibly effective. And, the other thing, and also a comment that the SUNY chancellor mentioned, was the other best thing for improving economic mobility of students through the CUNY and SUNY system is for them to actually get better students and to stay focused on both the K through 12, the pre-K, the daycare, because all of that does make a difference for what needs to happen for the social mobility of being successful from going to college.
Great. What's your answer?
No, I mean, I don't think there's there are many things that we know that are effective and work, and I think it's always the case of, are we going to invest in them? And I think about at the Foundling, we do a lot of evidence-based practice. It's costly, but we also know that it's effective to the point of like CUNY ASAP, right? And so I think it really is taking a hard look at, where are we spending money? And is it the right priorities? Is it the right way to spend that money? And making some tough choices about, do you turn around and invest more in things that actually can be impactful? And we know that. The other thing I'll say is, there's not a single issue that I can think about in my time in government that didn't require everybody coming to the table, right? Like street homelessness, I was talking with a colleague and I'm like, it is everybody else's challenge. It's not DSS, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have everybody at the table to deal with it, whether it includes FD, it includes sanitation, it includes social services, it includes housing. I can go around the table and remember our war rooms where you're working together collectively, and it wasn't about necessarily an additional investment. It's about how do you leverage all of these agencies and the leadership in these agencies to move the needle on a big issue, which, including, to that point, the MTA, right, the state. So there's a lot of things I think you can tackle collectively. Most certainly we did in the times of COVID. It wasn't about the Department of Health. It was every single agency stepping up to the table, and City Hall really bringing everybody to bear and leveraging all of that expertise.
Yeah, which all comes back to, again, leadership and prioritization.
Absolutely.
Look, the two most important words here, I think, are going to be minimum wage. It is the most direct way to put money in the pockets of low-income and struggling people. It's already out of date, and we made a huge step forward 6 or 8, 10 years ago, but it's well past its moment now. It is not a budget item. It is a cost to the city item, but it's not a budget item per se. It's an example of the kind of regulatory interventions cities and states and the federal government create the rules in which markets operate. So we can use those rules, whether it's for deliveristas or whether it's the minimum wage, whether it's paid sick leave or any of the other rules we set. So I think one is the regulatory power. Two is the power of data and analytics. We're only just touching on our ability to use data and analytics. The CUF report yesterday that I was talking to some of you all about internet access in the Bronx and other neighborhoods. That's both powerful and important in and of itself, but also an example of the kind of analytics that shine light on a problem and create attention and therefore can help mobilize change. So I think data can matter. And finally, and the biggest one, and it's not really necessarily for the government to do, I think it's for the people in this room to do, for the sort of the social and community-based organization and advocacy community, is to continue to put pressure on the government and to change the conversation. We used to say a lot in my day, what we need was change at scale. Not pilot programs, not little test programs, but change at scale. Pre-K was a change at scale. 75,000 kids will have a program forever, forever. And there's other versions of that. We've got to shift the window of what we think is possible. And I think that means changing what academics sometimes call the Overton window. What we once thought was unthinkable or radical can become acceptable or sensible and eventually becomes policy. So I do think we need to think about this in a bigger way and not just in the government, which is by nature, as Mel well knows and was talking about, incrementalist in the way it thinks. Big change has to come sometimes from outside and from the leadership in the government. So I think we do need regulatory tools. We do need, oh, and one last thing. Cross-agency stuff is, as you said, Mel, the hardest thing for us. Everybody in medicine knows that social determinants of health are the most important aspect of health. Every cop knows that safety on the streets is not only the work of police officers, it's about poverty and racism and also. Everybody who teaches public schools knows it's not about what happens between 8 and 3. It's about what happens when the kid goes home and what their parents do and where they study. We all know these are interdisciplinary solution sets, and yet the government is structured in a Fordist model of incremental, of detailed and broken down functions, and the funding streams encourage that. We've got to find a way to get cross-disciplinary thinking, and homelessness, as you said, Mel, is the perfect example of that.
My favorite quote is, my favorite quote ever about government is that, life is lived horizontally, but government is organized vertically, and that is a fundamental problem with deliverance for people.
I just wanted to say one thing about regulatory and minimum wage. There is a cost to it. And I see it on this side every day in the nonprofit world, which is, every dollar that we get, at least I can say, most certainly for the family, I've invested in the people who do this work, who keep communities intact and families intact. And they make very poor wages. And so here it is, I have, day in and day out, take care of over 900 people with developmental disabilities in 90 residences. And up until recently, I convinced my board, they were making $17 an hour. And they're shift workers. They work 3 jobs to make it work. And even going to $20 as a base and taking the risk that if we get cut, we're stuck with paying those wages, how am I gonna do that? That's still not enough in New York City. So I agree, yes, I would love $30, but when you're 90% of your organization's dependent on government, how are you doing that, right? And so I read something recently where it was an opinion piece where it's like, the nonprofits are gonna be at the next mayoral, wanting more money. And I'm like, that's really dismissive of what we do and the importance of our work in communities. And to say that we're paying these wages and it's dependent on government is sufficient, there is a cost to it. And if we're not doing this work, who's doing this work at a much higher cost? So, recently we launched a statewide campaign around this whole issue and to raise and create a floor. And I can't tell you the amount of pushback we're getting. It's going to cost billions of dollars over time. I've never led a campaign that did happen in 5 minutes. I think about, raise the age. It took 5 years to do that. But you have to start somewhere, and we can't keep discounting the sector as, we keep doing this work for very little, right? And the founding's in a fortunate place where we can do that. We can invest our own resources. Not many nonprofits can do that.
Right, but this is a really good point, and you're absolutely right, Tony, that increasing the minimum wage is a game changer, that it's probably the right moment for it, and it has all those positive impacts. But it does have a cost for the part of it that affects government, as Mel just pointed out. And, I went through this in CUNY for a number of years, and it's the issue of paying for a labor contract. And in the past couple of years, thanks to both the governor and the mayor, they made a policy change. It actually started, to his credit, under the de Blasio administration, and it also continues now, but expanded in the last year or so in the Hochul administration from the state, where both the state and the city are fully funding the cost of the labor contracts, which is the equivalent of your minimum wage point, so that it's not a new hit on CUNY and SUNY.
No, totally true.
So I just want to follow up on that, the point about nonprofits and the role and responsibility of nonprofits and civil society more broadly in this moment. What should the nonprofit organizations that are so responsible for so many of the programs and services that we rely on to keep people safe and healthy and ultimately to move them forward economically, what is the charge or what is the advice for those organizations in this challenging moment?
You run my mouth.
Solve this, please.
Look, I'll start where I ended. They've got to be the ones pushing. So government will respond. It mostly responds to the voices of the powerful. If it wants to respond to somebody else, those voices have to be loud, and those voices have to be heard. If not, we know who dominates the conversation. It's no secret, it's been true forever and will be true forever. Those voices have to be organized, and the civil society that's in this room and listening on whatever has to be pressing very hard the kind of points Mel was making about if we care about these people, we have to care about the people who care about those people and demonstrate that, because budgets are about choices and choices are about values. So let's make that clear. So I think if we want to shift this conversation, again, recognizing the hell that's about to be rained on New York, that push has to come from the grassroots up. And politics is the only way that becomes manifest, because it's not a money issue. The money belongs to somebody else.
So can you push, not to push, but just to explore that, so many of those organizations feel profoundly vulnerable right now. They are receiving letters from congressional committees. They are losing access to funding. They have boards who are reticent to enter the political sphere in any way because they don't want to be on anybody's target list. So it doesn't mean that the answer to your question isn't the same. But I wonder, what do we do, and I don't mean to put that on you to respond, but what do we do when those nonprofits say, yeah, we hear you, but we feel like we have so little power as it is, and we're under so much threat. How can we then be the vanguard for the change that we need?
Yeah, it's like Lisa Murkowski said, we're afraid. And then 2 weeks later, acted exactly like somebody who was afraid. So we are all afraid. I do think a little bit of the overwhelming terror of the first 6 months will, in some respects, start to slow, because we're going to realize we're all still here and we're all still together. I do think the next wave is going to get worse and more provocative in terms of this civil violence and other questions that may start, the sort of, Tom Homan's view of the world. But I think the key goes back to that issue of leadership of a mayor holding a city together. And mayors have done that. Mike Bloomberg did that after 9/11. We can go through example after example of mayors who've led us through very difficult times. And I think our guy did at some points, and others have done at other points. This is that moment when whoever that next mayor is going to have to not only say to Washington, which is going to rain hell on us no matter who it is, but to our own people, that we're together here. And this is a big place with a lot of power, not just financial power and political power, but cultural power and symbolic power. And if we can stand up together and everybody know we have their backs, will there be those who want to sell us out for a tax break? Sure. That's always been true. But we can, I think, assure as many people as we can that the city's enormous 1,000-person law department, that it's billions of pages of regulatory construct, that it's nearly 400,000 employees, are there to help create some bulwark for them. I think that's what leadership's going to be.
Look, I'm worried too. I think that, back in February when, there was this scare around Head Start, and I'm up in Albany, and I get this phone call, and I was like, okay, can we make payroll? Can we figure this out? And then I said, you know what? And by 3 o'clock, it was done. No, they rescinded. And I just said, we can't keep going on this roller coaster. It's destabilizing for our workforce, for our employees. We have to, leadership, right? Weather the storm. And I think there's two things. One, to Tony's earlier point about data. So, when we were launching our campaign statewide to bring up minimum pay for the human services workforce, we turned to ISLG, CUNY, and said, we need data. We need to explain our workforce in a much different way, which is, who are they? What are their wages? How do they contribute economically to the city and across the state? And I don't think that has been done before.
And we were the cheapest place to do the work.
That is very true. But I also think, to your point, Rich, we have to, I think, as a sector, explain this differently. I think we're always talking about, leading with the money ask. And I have been really explaining, like, what do we do? And we'd say Head Start, what does that mean? And it's not just about early childhood. As I said before, we employ 500 people. That's a big part of the economy of Puerto Rico, that island. And the ripple effect of losing that and what we do in communities, we're not just about early childhood, right? When there's the power outage, our staff are there to support people in the community. And Puerto Rico is not San Juan. It is definitely not. And so I think in just doing that with some of our leaders in DC has been like, oh, really? Is that what Head Start's about? I had no idea. And I'm like, wow, I would thought you guys were around when Head Start was created, but okay. Sure, but I think too in the sector we've kind of lost that thread about what we do and what our impact is, and that is really critically important. And if I put on my old hat during the times of COVID and when we were rolling out vaccines, we could not have done that without the sector, because their credibility to really convince marginalized communities who otherwise would never trust to have a vaccine that was created in such a short period of time, even with all the technology that we have. We needed credible messengers, and we would have never vaccinated as many in communities that were hardest hit without. And the other worry I have too is, for folks like Robin Hood, right? The pressure that creates on the foundation community to then step in. I've said to my board, like, we need to really be thinking strategically as well, because there are a lot of organizations who can't support, right, that don't have the resources. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure. And I don't know if that's something that you're all talking about as well. And we saw that during COVID, right? Everybody shifted their priorities. And so what's the next shift? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, well, no, it certainly creates particular challenges for philanthropy. I mean, you say that the city and the state can't fill those gaps. I can guarantee that philanthropy can't fill those gaps. But I think one of the challenges is then with limited resources. I mean, you can spend more with philanthropy. Some organizations have more capacity to do that than others. But where do you spend that money? Is it to shore up critical organizations that are going to go out of business? Is it to drive resources to the most high effective organizations, even if those organizations are already well resourced? It raises some real interesting problems about questions about what is the role of those philanthropic gap dollars, which in an ideal world are driving innovations like ASAP, but may now be backstopping emergency food services in a way that are obviously critical to people surviving. They're not necessarily, if you were organizing the world, and not how you would want philanthropic dollars to be spent. And so those questions are going to be, they're real for us too. Mark, do you have a reflection on that?
On Tony's point, at the end of the day, this is what leadership is about, and it requires, amongst us at this table, I mean, we're just staff, right? I mean, we work for leaders, right? And you never know who the leaders are until there's a crisis, and a crisis creates leaders, and hopefully out of this crisis, we'll see some people taking real leadership roles in New York City and New York State. And, and with regard to your comment about how the philanthropic community can't make up for the cuts that are coming down the pike. One of the things that I think is more important for the philanthropic community to do is to continue to do the kind of experimentation of new ideas and innovative ideas, the kind of stuff that has been discussed here earlier, because government can't afford to initiate those programs. So, you know, I think that that's a role for the philanthropic community to double their efforts to do that, so that when things turn around, you can turn back to the government with, here's a new set of ideas that we have run through the system and found to be really effective. And, you know, you government now take these on and start using them.
Yeah. So we're going to open up to the audience for questions in a minute. Before we do, I have one last question. Again, reflecting on some of the threads that I've heard. We need to work together more effectively as government. You talk about homelessness as being truly an all-city effort. I can tell you that for pre-K, the most fun thing about pre-K is that effort was truly an all-of-city government effort. Mm-hmm. Fire department, police department, health department, a huge role, buildings department, the DDC, I mean, everywhere, all coming together. If we talk about government working more efficiently together, we've talked about sort of the inefficiencies, finally having 6 contracts as one city agency, all the challenges that come with contracting and the way that government interacts with the people who deliver services. Talking about the need for more evidence-based practices and driving more resources towards things that work. And certainly, one of the most exciting things for me about emerging technologies are really trying to think about, can we push the way that we use artificial intelligence to understand using city and state level data, public data, to really understand what kind of interventions are making a difference for people. So we have all these big things that we talk about, but we've all, I won't count how many years all of us have been in government in different ways, and we make progress, but we still fundamentally have challenges. We still spend too much public dollars on things that don't work, even though we all know the things that do. The cross-agency collaboration is still the exception, not the norm. We make improvements in how we are efficient, but we're still like, you've got those 6 contracts, and the biggest thing, every day a new fascinating story about the ways in which nonprofits are struggling to engage with government. Why is that? Now I have to say, I only spent 4 years in government, but some of the smartest, hardest working people I've ever had the privilege to work with. Why is it so hard to do those things, to move those things?
Because in large organizations, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, really large organizations, you need to think through how to make incremental change. And incremental, other than, you know, having revolutions, incremental change is the way governments change and adapt. And, you know, I mean, yes, in the private sector you can decide to do a massive change to something, but all it is it's a company. Then if you're successful, you're going to be a hero, and if it's a failure, the company's going to fail. Who cares? But government can't afford to fail like that. And so, you know, it's a different responsibility to be running system. It's the same big systems, but you don't have those kind of choices. And you know, the people that are really successful in government and have successful careers figure out how to successfully do incremental change.
Miller, Tony, any?
So look, I mean, I think there's a lot of diagnoses of this, and whether it's the sort of abundance diagnosis that says we've become prisoners of process, and that's made it hard for us to accomplish things, whether it's the phenomenon we all know that public servants tend to be punished for failure much more than they are rewarded for success. So therefore, it creates a bias towards inaction and conservatism that's very hard to overcome, and the media and others exacerbate that. And the lack of confidence that the general public has in the government for those reasons, our ability and our lack of ability to accomplish things. But look, I have to say, these things are very hard. And they are. They're very hard. And there's some very talented people. The thing I would leave you with is there's also tremendous joy in doing this job. And I walked up the steps of City Hall 1,000 times, I think, in the 4 years I was managing the government. And every day I stopped at the bottom and took a breath on the way up those stairs. And I sort of always, I kind of remembered there's a Steve Sondheim line about someday begins today. It's like, this was an unbelievable gift to be able to try and roll that rock up the hill. And it was very difficult, and we mostly failed. And, it's like, what do they say about raising kids? The days are long, but the years are short, right? There was some long days. But at the end of the day, it is an unbelievable joy to be able to do this and to make it even a little bit better. And every one of us made it better. Good, good enough, fabulous, model, not yet. Better, yes.
Amen to that. Mel? All right, questions from the crowd. So there's folks walking around with mics. Please introduce yourself before you ask the question.
Hi, my name's Annabelle from It's Material. Couple of questions. One is on the role of AI. You touched on it briefly, but I've been interested how it hasn't really come up, either in the conversation with the chancellor of SUNY or now in terms of the opportunities when we think of economic mobility. There was a conversation recently about the context of Southeast Asia, for example, and how fast people can be trained into jobs using AI than previously. It might have taken 4 years. Now that can be sped up. But also the risks. There's a lot of narrative around entry-level jobs in several industries disappearing. At what level does that factor in your thinking around levels of risks and opportunities at the moment? And a specific question for Anthony Shoris, really interested when you're lifting up social tension and conflict as one of the major potential challenges facing the city. Are you thinking at the city level, or are you thinking about social conflict across the country and how the city responds? And if you're thinking at the city level, along what fault lines? I was really interested in that, and that obviously the city has faced lots of tensions in the past, but also rallies around as a whole as sort of one of its characteristics. So I'd love you to unpack that a little bit.
We'll start there, and then we can sort of open up to AI.
I am thinking about it at the city level, because I think there's a risk that there are people who are going to want to make an example of New York. And besides the fact that we're the biggest city, and besides the fact that we're the media capital, and besides the fact that we're a city that put some statue in the harbor about welcoming people, there was a time we did that. For all those reasons and more, I think there's a pretty good chance that some people will try and make an example of us. And the best way to make an example of us is to sow disorder and disagreement, and I think that's what we have to be ready for. The infrastructure of our character is about to be tested.
Any reflections on AI and government?
So,
I'm not sure how to follow it.
I started this discussion by announcing I was the oldest person here, which I think is still true. And AI is an area, I'll tell you what I know about AI. I have 2 sons that work in that field and understand it. And I don't understand it. And to me, it's going to become a really, really important part of both the public and the private sector going forward, and people need to figure out how to incorporate it into government. But it's literally the job of the next generation and younger people coming into government that will bring those skill sets in with them.
I wish I could say that to my workforce, but no. It's the job of the next generation. No, so we are, I think my biggest concern is that government is behind on this, right? And to your point, there's a lot that can be done with AI. Right now, we're doing a little bit of it and participating in a pilot to figure out how we can use it in practice, and I think it can be a real game changer when you think about even doing a therapy session and having to take your notes, and if you can do that through AI instead of the time it takes, and how many more children can you impact if you're actually in a session. People don't sign up to do social work to take notes, right? They do it to impact and have an impact on community and people. And so I do think there's a lot of opportunity, but I am worried that we're behind in it. And government needs to move a lot faster to be able to catch up.
Yeah, I also agree there are both opportunities and threats that are very serious here. The biggest challenge for the government is it's very hard for us to attract and retain talent when we are in direct competition with the private sector. So you want to be a cop, you're going to want to work for New York City. You want to be a AI programmer developer, you have a few options, and some of them pay better than New York. So figuring out how to internalize excellence in this kind of technology without being reliant on external resources and consultants or whatever to actually build that internal capacity is something I think we're going to have to think really hard about, because otherwise we're going to end up, and we don't have to be at the bleeding edge of technology. That's not a good spot for the government because of that thing I mentioned, that we get punished for failure and not rewarded for success. The private sector actually is rewarded for failure sometimes, and plenty of entrepreneurs are proud of how many companies they've started and that failed, and they started another one, and that's a good attitude. We don't have that. The New York Post does not allow that. So we have to figure out how we're going to develop excellence in places where we are directly in competition in the private sector and where we need different risk models for. And I think we can do it, and we have some examples of it where we've set up corporations within the government, et cetera. I think technology is an area we've got to think about that.
Thank you. More questions?
Hi, Jane Wiesenberg with Tishman Speyer, and formerly Economic Development Advisor to Governor Hochul. Wondering if you could talk about the housing crisis and how you see the mayor and the agencies handling, on the one hand, the real need to provide economic relief in the form of rent freezes or prevailing wage requirements, but on the other hand, the city's real need to grow the housing supply. So curious for your perspective on that.
All these small questions.
I know. They're so easy.
Any takers?
Yeah, dig Mitchell and Lama out of the grave and send them back to Albany.
No, but I mean, I'm putting, it's probably slightly facetious, but it's not entirely wrong, right? They created a new fiscal model, a new financial model, and we're going to need other financial models. But I think we've made a little progress on this, right? City of Yes was an important step. The Charter Commission may add some additional important steps. But this requires change at scale. City of Yes was probably worth 80, 100,000 units maybe, which is great. Charter Commission stuff may add to that, I don't know. We probably need 500, 600, 700,000 units. And the metro area, which is really the true housing market, not just the city, it's the metro area, probably needs 900,000 units. So we're going to have to think at a whole different level of scale. So I think we're making little bits of progress on, creating greater good versus local issues and some of those balances. But major rezoning conversations are going to have to be had. Major regulatory changes are going to have to be had. Conversations are going to have to be had. I think the good news is everybody agrees it's now one of the central issues for the city. We cannot attract the labor force we need and retain it unless we deal with the housing problem. And the city is actually doing a lot better job on this than Long Island, Westchester, and the North, which are completely shirking their responsibilities here. So the city's doing well, Northern New Jersey's doing very well, but we need step change in this, and we're going to have to talk about some pretty difficult conversations to get 200, 300, 400,000 more units.
No, the one thing I'll emphasize that you said, where I do agree, is that I think this is not a place, a moment where the crisis is not going to be wasted, where people now understand that anything close to the status quo, marginal improvements will not suffice. And that creates the opportunity for the kind of step changes. Now, whether we all have the political will to see those things through is another question. But understanding that we both have to continue to work on the demand side of the equation, making sure that people have the resources to pay rent, but also recognizing that we need to build. We need to build a lot more housing in a lot more places, much more efficiently, much more quickly, much less expensively, is the only way to have the city, I won't even say be okay, to survive.
in anything like the way we want the city, we all imagine the city to be. And so I do feel somewhat optimistic that the awareness of the crisis is the kind of awareness that will now allow behavior that would have been unthinkable even 10 years ago. Any other questions? Okay. Next question. The people with the mics have so much power.
I love it.
It's all in your hands.
But it needs to turn on. Is it on? Okay.
It's on.
Good morning. My name's Allison Courier. I'm a nonprofit staff member. Currently, I do community engagement currently for the High Line. So neighbor a few blocks away, come by after lunch. We could do a walk. But my question is really direct and looking for just a simple answer. I think one of the themes, right, is unifying all our nonprofits, institutions, public, private sector together to, hold our electeds accountable. I think we're all down for that. But what's a direct example? Obviously, Center for Urban Future does this in research, and there's so many ways. But what are some clean examples that us as people on the ground can really either come together to pressure or to hold accountable? Or is it social media? Is it writing? Is it programming, and how to kind of be those kind of catapults? Examples of that, I guess, is my question.
Well, I'll start, but I don't have much to say about it. But it starts with doing a little bit of all of that, but directed toward all of the elected officials. And by all the elected officials, I go back to my earlier point of both in city government, in the city council, in the mayor's office, and in the governor's office, and in the state legislature, and the Senate, and the Assembly, and reaching all of those people, because at the end of the day, they collectively will make the decision about what to do and not do with the resources of the city and state. And so, to me, it's the issue of understanding some issues better belong in Albany, some issues better belong in the city, but most issues need to be played out in both arenas to be successful.
Yeah, I hate to break it, there is no simple answer. In my time in government, there's never been a simple answer for sure, but it's everything that you said, but it's a long game, right? You can't organize at that level and use all of those tactics and expect to see something like that. And, I talked about a campaign that I launched. I go back to my days at the Children's Defense Fund. It took 5 years, right? And it was relentless focus on a single issue. And yes, it was every elected official, but it was strategy, right? About who you're approaching and why, and getting champions. You're never gonna be able to win over everybody, but if you approach the right folks and get them to corral people, then you're getting somewhere, right? And it's no different than when we launched this campaign I'm talking about around bringing up minimum pay. We just launched it, we just got legislation introduced. This is a long game, it's not gonna happen, especially in this climate, fiscal climate. But if we don't raise it, if we don't continue to pursue it, then it never gets life, it never gets a voice. And so I think you have to be relentless, understand it's not that simple, and it's a long game.
And look, there have been examples, we've seen them, but as Mel said, they were almost all, if it wasn't a couple of years, it was longer. So whether it was gay marriage, or whether it was minimum wage, or we made structural changes in the city and the state, but after substantial investment. The only other caveat I would offer is, a few weeks ago, people my age, younger than Mark, thank God, were taught a lesson, I think, we'll talk after. We're taught a really important lesson about how communications works in the political context now. And that the rules of the game that we all grew up with about television and big institutions and the power of labor unions and the power of endorsements, at least in that one context, didn't work. And a whole different model worked. So I don't want to over-rotate on that. Maybe that'll never happen again. Maybe that was a one-off. But if it's not, the way Trump taught us that Twitter and that whatever it's become continue to be an important source of activating a certain part of the country, I think the recent election taught us that other tools have a different group they activate, and activate them in a different way, because visual video media are clearly different than 140 or 280 character media. So I do think as we think about what those efforts are going to be, they need to be done in a way that reflects the new way of communicating, not the way of communicating I grew up with, because I don't think that works anymore.
I think we may have time for one quick one.
I promise I'm quick. Could we have the Wi-Fi again? Welcome to the Rubin has been unsuccessful so far. And then two, during your tenures, if New York City had home rule and so to your point, creature of the state and minimum wage was in control of the city, what would it be a dream thing that you would have done as part of your tenure?
Taxes. Taxes. I think we should have more control over our own tax policy. And it's crazy we don't. But that's apparently the way the United States Constitution was written, so it's a bit of a challenge. It doesn't say United Cities of America, but anyway.
The real property tax.
Could
Tax
start there.
reform, which we had discussions for a while when you were budget director, Mayo.
Oh, you mean when I got pummeled as budget director on property tax reform? Yes, we certainly did.
You know, the property tax is the most important tax in the city of New York, because all kidding aside, while the city's a creature of the state and you have to go to Albany for everything to increase any other tax other than the property tax. So it's a really important, it's the largest revenue source in the city budget to this day. It's an incredibly inequitable system, and it needs to be fixed so that it's more equitable, so that when the time comes to raise the property tax, people are more open to it because they're feeling that they're paying their fair share as opposed to there are winners and losers in it. So I think one needs to focus on doing tax reform. Having said that, that requires going to Albany. And it's complicated, and there's a whole history to it. But, you know, someday that's going to be the most important thing to focus on. And one of the things that has been toyed with, again, as a revenue source to help pay for property tax reform, because you have to deal with the winners and losers in the system, is to create a new revenue source, a la what the Water Authority was when the Water Authority was first created. The City Water Authority was created in 1985 as one of those big responses to the fiscal crisis. When, because of the fiscal crisis, the city stopped investing in the Third City Water Tunnel, and everybody knew that we needed to fix the first two water tunnels because they were 100 years old, and the only way to do that was to create a third water tunnel. And so there was a decision made in the early 80s for the city to embark on a new structure for paying for the capital of the Water Authority, the capital of the Third City Water Tunnel. And legislation was passed in Albany creating this new revenue source. And my point is that it was a new revenue source to help provide monies that was otherwise coming out of the property tax. And so it was actually an offset to the pressure on the property tax, so it could be used for other purposes. And eventually some smart people in OMB decided not only can it pay for the capital costs, but it can pay for the operating costs. And the operating capital costs of the entire Department of Environmental Protection are paid for by water fees. And when I say the word fees, they're fees, not taxes. And that opens the door to having fees that can be structured in a similar way to cover properties that are currently tax exempt in this town. And that can open the door to new revenues also.
It's such an honor to have three of the wisest, most creative public servants New York City has ever produced. Mark Shaw, Mel Hartzog, and Tony Shores. Thank you so much.
And Rich Geary.
All right, please hang on. We're going to actually keep moving. We've got a lot more to come. Please, though, join me in another round of applause for this great panel. All right. So in just a minute, I'm going to bring up John Friedman for a very exciting fireside chat, but I'm going to now share our next idea for economic mobility in New York. All right. Our third idea of the day for economic mobility is all about good jobs, or rather, to build a proven model for expanding access to good jobs in New York, the New York Jobs CEO Council. The Jobs CEO Council is an economic mobility success story. Prior to its creation in 2020, there were too few concrete pathways for low-income New Yorkers into the well-paying jobs at the city's largest companies. But in 2023 alone, it's roughly 30 member companies, including JP Morgan Chase, Amazon, and Accenture, hired more than 10,000 low-income New Yorkers into jobs paying $69,000 or more. These outcomes didn't just happen because New York's top employers suddenly decided to hire from a broader and more diverse talent pool. They were the result of a deliberate strategy. The New York Jobs CEO Council stepped in as a critical connector, building partnerships between 30 of the city's largest employers and key talent pipelines like CUNY, apprenticeship programs, and career development providers. Before this effort, many employers lacked clear pathways to access emerging talent, while education and training providers often didn't have direct relationships with hiring managers. The Jobs CEO Council helped bridge that gap, creating sustained hiring partnerships. But our idea is, why just stop at 30 large employers? New York is full of so many large and growing businesses. Since 2021, for example, city firms with between 50 and 500 employees have added more than 140,000 new jobs in New York. But very few of these large companies are actively engaged with talent development programs that are serving low-income New Yorkers. Meanwhile, many of the strongest talent development organizations face challenges in scaling, not because of funding alone, but because it's difficult to aggregate demand from employers. A coordinated effort to engage more of the city's largest companies can help unlock and pool that demand and enable more graduates of CUNY colleges and career training programs to move into good jobs. To achieve this, the next mayor should pull together to recruit 100 more leading companies to partner on efforts to hire low-income New Yorkers into good jobs and create a new intermediary or scale up an existing one that emulates the successful practices of the Jobs CEO Council. By doing this, the city can extend opportunity to thousands more low-income New Yorkers, connecting them to well-paying jobs across a broader swath of the economy. Thank you. So now let's, if John could come up. Hello. How are you? Great to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, thanks so much again for sticking with us today. I'm so delighted and excited for this conversation. If you don't know John, you should. We're here at an event today that's all about economic mobility, ideas for advancing economic mobility in New York, and we've got one of the nation's foremost experts, one of the leading scholars on economic mobility. I'll just say quickly that he is the dean of the Thomas J. Watson School of International and Public Affairs at Brown University, and he's also the founding co-director of Opportunity Insights, where he's done path-breaking research on inequality and upward mobility, a lot of it having to do with education and higher education, but I won't go into all of that because I want to get into these questions. We have limited time, but thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here today.
So today's summit is focused on ideas to protect and strengthening New York's economic mobility programs in this really difficult time, right, amidst unprecedented threats from Washington. But whatever New York's leaders will be able to do, they're going to need to make difficult choices. We've heard that on all the panels today, right, because of the kind of fiscal situation we're probably going to be in. And so with that in mind, it seems important to understand what really works. when it comes to local policies that move the needle on economic mobility? Or what has the biggest impacts? And that's where I really wanted to ask you. You've studied this probably more than anyone. What have you found? What really does work?
Well, first of all, let me say I like the ideas that you've had so far today. It's a good place to start. Generally, we find that there are, I think, really two key inputs into economic mobility. One is education, and the other is social capital, which really you want to think of as about integration. It's about the environment in a very local sense that kids grow up in. Who are the other kids? Who are the other families that they're interacting with, both at school and around their neighborhood? And so we had a number of speakers to talk about some exciting ideas around education earlier, and we can come back to that if you like, but just to think about some of what seems to work on the other side. You talked earlier today about moving families to higher opportunity neighborhoods, but of course we want to improve the opportunity in existing neighborhoods. And it seems like we're starting to see evidence that community revitalization programs seem to really work on this front, especially when they're not just focused on kind of fixing the physical plant in an isolated island of poverty and keeping it that way, but rather focused on both regenerating the buildings and helping to integrate those families better in the community. And sometimes that can come through making whatever development more mixed income, sometimes just tearing down massive towers in a way that integrates better with the community around it can do that trick as well. So I would say this kind of integrated housing development, especially in a place like New York where housing supply is such a key issue, that's something else that really seems to work in terms of promoting upward mobility.
So, that's all really helpful. And I would just say, so we're going to have these difficult choices, right? That whoever's the mayor come January is going to be dealing with, potentially over $10 billion of kind of budget deficits. And how do you kind of create economic mobility or expand programs amidst all of that? It's going to be challenging. So of the things that you mentioned, is there something that you think a city can do when it comes to, let's say, social networks, when it comes to that kind of development you talked about? What are some of those things?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what seems to matter is a lot about who kids are interacting with. And you can spend a ton of money on that by, rebuilding structures, but you can also work on that more by, who's in what classroom with whom, or are there ways to pull kids together? There's an innovative program in Atlanta where they have soccer or football matches around metro stations at the end of the day to be able to pull kids together in a way that allows people coming from more than just, the local community. And I think that keeping that community engagement in mind, who are the kids spending time around? That's something which, whether it's part of education programs like the Harlem Children's Zone or Community in Schools, whether it's part of the type of housing voucher program you talked about earlier today, whether it's in higher ed, whether it's thinking about jobs. A lot of what makes these jobs programs particularly effective is not just focusing solely on the narrow set of technical skills that young adults need in order to be able to do the job, but on those elements of what you might call soft skills, like how do you navigate a professional environment? If you're a couple years earlier, how do you put together a sequence of courses that puts you on a trajectory towards being ready for a career? How do you find a job? How do you get an internship that leads to a job after you graduate? These are the types of things where, from one perspective, it can be really very straightforward, especially if you come from a background where this type of stuff is in the air and you hear about it from your friends, you hear about it from your older siblings and their friends, you hear about it from your parents. But if you're coming from a background where, learning how to navigate this world is not something that you're familiar with, you can see how it's just, wow, this is such a complicated problem, I don't know where to start, and then that can lead people to kind of, recede and not really be as upwardly mobile.
It sounds like, part of what you're saying, especially with education and housing, has a lot to do with integration and just kind of making sure that we don't have the same kind of segregated networks that often ends up happening in a city like New York.
That's completely right. I think that Just to say a bit more, when I talk about social capital, a lot of people use that word to mean many different things. So, for instance, if you read books by Robert Putnam, it's all about civic engagement and like, why don't we have Elks Clubs anymore? I think that's an important dimension of it. What really seems to matter for upward mobility is basically this, exactly what you said. It's about integration. It's making sure that children don't grow up in isolated islands of poverty where kind of the only people they're interacting with around them on a daily basis are other children or other families that are similarly living in poverty. So, whether it's in the neighborhoods, whether it's in schools, I think that integration is a huge part of what seems to be successful.
I mean, it seems like something to shoot for city leaders with regard to housing policy, with regard to education policy, but also difficult to achieve. And it's not, so it seems like we should try to probably do that and really kind of strive for that. But the Atlanta example, although, a little fun, it sounds like there are other things that may be achievable on the ground to kind of get people together. Are there other examples beyond that Atlanta model that you've seen?
Yeah, so it's the type of thing where it's hard to have a big, massive policy that you spend a lot of money on, right? It's the type of thing where in lots of different policies, you can shade it this way or shade it that way in a way that, again, may not affect the price tag enormously, but which can make a huge difference. So the type of advising programs that John King was talking about earlier this morning, that's another way in communities that are higher education institutions to not just support students when they may be coming from backgrounds that lack that exposure to, how do you navigate when you get to CUNY or SUNY, but they're helping to create the connections that will support the students as they go forward. So, that's a small part of what those institutions are doing, but I think it's the type of thing where if you, build a great new training program, but you leave out some of these other pieces, the whole thing can fall flat. And the same thing is true when you think about K through 12 schools. Same thing is true when you think about neighborhood redevelopment programs, or when you think about these voucher type programs. It's, I think, less about a big signature policy that solves all the problems at once, and rather, how do you build this into all the other things that you're already doing in order to make them more successful?
It sounds like something we don't do very much of. I did want to pick up on CUNY and SUNY as you kind of talked about. First of all, I have a couple questions, but with regard to the social networks. So you have all these young people, mostly from low-income communities, that are coming to CUNY, different colleges across the city. Beyond the advising example that you talked about, are there other mechanisms that administrators at CUNY, and we have at least a couple of them here today, can make sure that people don't stay in their kind of isolated pockets, that they come in and they really do get kind of mixed experiences and they meet people from different backgrounds? Are there things that can work along those lines?
Yeah, so I think that sometimes we focus too much on these specific programs. You think the evidence for things like ASAP and the ACE program, the SEEK program, these are really very, very successful programs. But I think part of what makes schools like CUNY such a beacon in higher education in terms of supporting upward mobility is that it's not a special set of programs for a special set of students. It's just kind of baked into the fabric of everything that an enormous number of students are coming from these backgrounds. And so we're just going to design all of our programs with the assumption that people might not really have a sense of how to put together a college curriculum, or how to pick what major is right for them, or how to make sure that one class leads to the next class in the way that you need. I was once on a panel with a fantastic woman from another of our kind of amazing high mobility colleges in the United States, which is University of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. It was a standard thing. I was supposed to talk about some data, and then she was going to talk about some of the programs that she thought was super successful. And she leads off by saying, look, I'll get to the programs, but I just want to say, I really don't think any of the specifics matter. What matters is that just the entire focus of the university is helping students who might feel like they're out of place, who don't necessarily come from a background where they know how to navigate these types of things. And if you just have that as the starting mindset, if that's the organizing principle, then you organize things like how to send people tuition bills very, very differently, right? The types of programs that you talked about earlier today where like, yeah, you're not going to kick someone out of school for missing like $75 at the end of, their 4th year in college. Things like that you're like, yeah, like let's just set our expectations in a different way. So I think that it's that broader lens that's really important when it comes to places like CUNY.
So CUNY is so important. Obviously, this is something that comes up in the Opportunity Insights research. CUNY as this incredible engine of economic mobility, of upward mobility, and you've talked about it already. But I'm just curious, like before we leave this topic, are there things that you think that we can even do more of, or CUNY can do more of, to really build on this resource, to make sure even more kids are having the success that CUNY obviously can kind of generate?
Yeah. So just to, first of all, why is it that CUNY is such a force in upward mobility in higher education, right? There are two things that a university or a college needs to be able to do in order to support upward mobility. The first thing is it needs to pull in students from a really broad range of backgrounds. It needs to be accessible to students coming from low income, from first generation backgrounds. And then the second thing is once those kids are at school, you need to put them on trajectories that really propel them, not just to graduate, but towards success in the labor force or whatever it is, that can be defined in many different ways, but success towards that long-term mobility goal. And I think that each of the sides of those two sides of the coin of mobility require different kind of tactical approaches. But again, I think it actually comes all back to this same thing about recognizing that it's not just about the technical skills, it's about these kind of social capital driven aspects of how you navigate these spaces. So for instance, a lot of this starts when students are in high school, making sure that one, students understand that this is an option that might be financially achievable for them. Making sure that they understand that choosing college, you don't just go to college because you have to check the box of going to college, right? There's an enormous number of different ways you can go to college. Some of them are a lot better than others. Some of them are a lot better fit for some people than others. Helping people, it doesn't have to be something that's a tremendously complicated decision, but it's the type of thing kind of like financial investing where there are a couple kind of rules of thumb that might not be obvious to people who've never done it before. And of course, most people only go through high school and apply to college once in their lives. But once you help people figure it out, it's something that it's intuitive. It becomes second nature. And then once people are there, we've talked about a lot of the elements inside the college. But I wanted to pick up on something that John said earlier as well, where really thinking hard about it's not just about supporting students to do whatever they want. Colleges have the ability to, I think, have a better sense of what their programs are enabling for their students. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves that some programs are not going to be as successful. Some programs are going to be more successful. And we have to be willing to, whether it's through financial aid or counseling or whatever it is, we have to be willing to make those, not necessarily that we make the choices for people, but that we make it clear, hey, look, here's a program, and if you want to do this, Godspeed, but you have to understand that this program leads to these sets of potential job outcomes, and that's going to be very different than if you take this other type of program.
And so, we started out by talking about what really works when what moves the needle on economic mobility, and whether it's in the context of CUNY or similar educational institutions or kind of city programs in general, what doesn't work when it comes to economic mobility?
Yeah.
Because we are going to need to make those tough decisions, and we probably shouldn't be doing the things that aren't working.
So I think the thing that I think is, not that this is the thing that works worst, but the place where I find people overestimate the importance for mobility the most is through just straight kind of cash transfers. It's an easier thing to do from a policy perspective, and so it's easy to see how that's kind of a tool that people want to lean on. But I actually think there's relatively little good evidence that just giving more cash to families, especially once you get up above kind of a really subsistence level, is that helpful. And I think the intuition is that more cash can make things, of course, financially easier, but it can't sweep away barriers of discrimination. It can't help integrate children more into a broad society. It can't overcome the fact if you're growing up in a really isolated island of poverty. It can't help students navigate through a complex institution like college to put themselves on a pathway towards upward mobility. And so, again, there are many good reasons to give cash assistance, and I think a lot of the times when we do that, it's more just because we don't like seeing families in a destitute way, and that's a completely reasonable policy goal. I just think it's a different policy goal than when we think about upward mobility and economic mobility for children.
Anything else that you think doesn't work?
I mean, I think that's the one that kind of, it comes out the most as something that but.
Well, then let me ask about something else. It's like a couple times earlier today, John, and I think Rich mentioned it on the last panel, is there's a focus on how do we actually make sure that the K through 12 system works better, right? So I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I think that there was a lot of focus on how do we drive better outcomes in that system. And you've written a lot about K through 12, and I know the power of teachers, the power of an inspiring teacher, but like any thoughts about, like, if we have, I mean, $35 billion right now is the budget for the city's Department of Education.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, right? So how do we make sure we get better outcomes?
So I think that what strikes me about K through 12 education especially is that there are just an enormous number of things that we know where there's really strong evidence for that improves learning, right? It's not that we are short on ideas for this. And I think sometimes people get more caught up in what's the particular flavor of the idea that you like or you don't like, right? Maybe you like things that try to incentivize better teachers. Maybe you don't. Maybe you'd prefer smaller classes. Maybe you prefer more kind of individualized learning. Maybe you'd prefer more kind of tutor support type of things. There are many, many others, like all of them have been shown to work. And so I actually think it's less that there's one right answer or a set of bad answers, but it's more that you have to take an outcome-oriented perspective, right? And you've heard a lot of this today as well, and I like that focus on outcomes as opposed to focus on inputs, right? Of course, you can spend money in lots of ways that aren't impactful, but if you have that outcome-oriented perspective where you're not just spending money for the sake of spending money, you're spending money because you want to see more children reading at grade level, because you want to see more children achieving the level necessary in high school so that they are academically eligible and motivated to attend college or some other workforce training program. That's an outcome that is something where we're not getting all the way to wages at age 30 or whatever is going to be your measure of upward mobility, but that's something that can help discipline when you're trying to actually allocate those dollars, like whether things are working or not. And it also provides a feedback loop that we're not going to get everything right up front, but if we are outcome oriented, we will see what's not working and what's working and be able to adjust it. And so I think actually it's more the politics of that to get in the way, where lots of different people have lots of different particular instincts or interest in how they want the money to be spent. But we're not short on good ideas about how to improve K-12 education.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you in general about other models. You've mentioned a couple things outside of New York, but just as we think about moving the needle on economic mobility in New York, are there other models out there in general for economic mobility you think New York should consider, that maybe New York should replicate? But also, are there other specific things around kind of the outcome-supported models around education that you've seen another city or state implement that maybe we should look at?
Yeah, so no city's perfect on all these things, but one city that I mentioned that I think has made real strides in this area over the past 10 or 15 years is Charlotte. So Charlotte was a city, first of all, that is similar to New York in some ways, very high growth, lots of good jobs being created. But at the same time, when Opportunity Insights released its first local mobility measures more than a decade ago, Charlotte was ranked 50th out of 50 in the United States. And to their credit, they really, they've been thinking about this issue before, but they really took this as an opportunity to galvanize support for an organization around upward mobility in the city. And through a series, there was a kind of a local high-level commission, and that resulted in a group called Leading on Opportunity, which is a kind of coordinating effort to pull in what the government's doing, what the local government's doing, and the state government, what the private sector, getting the private sector involved, I think has been very, very helpful. In Charlotte, similar to the CEO Council that you were talking about here, getting the private sector involved is very important. Getting higher education involved, getting community groups and nonprofits involved. I think that's one of the best models that I've seen, not just in terms of, first of all, really making strides on mobility. We've seen mobility increasing in Charlotte, but also in terms of doing it in a way that doesn't get too focused on one particular thing or another, right? There are lots of different areas in which one can think about improving mobility, and as the opportunities for policy reform in areas, they can come and go in ways that you can't always control, and so making sure that you're ready to have that opportunity agenda, whether it's in housing, whether it's in education, whether it's in workforce development, whether it's in higher ed, whatever is relevant. I also do think that Charlotte is a useful example. You mentioned what doesn't work. Let me maybe add one more to that. It seems to be very rarely the case, and I'd say that's especially true in a place like New York, that the problem with economic opportunity is kind of a labor demand problem, right? Sometimes you say, oh, if only we just had like more good jobs, that would be, would solve the problem. And in some places where the economies have really fallen apart, that may well be the case. But there are many examples like Charlotte. Atlanta is another one where you've seen places that are growing really quickly, lots of new jobs created, lots of good jobs created, lots of jobs that connect with careers. These are not like one-off things. But if the children growing up locally, especially from low-income families, if they don't have the skills, if they don't have those soft skills, the social capital in order to be in a place to be competitive for those jobs, these firms are going to, there's a big wide world of people who would love to be employed at them. And Charlotte for many years basically just imported all the highly skilled workers. And I think we're starting to see that change now because they've taken a different approach. It's not just build it and once the jobs are here, then that will fix the problems, but rather really thinking about childhood development, thinking about early adulthood as the key times where we need to be investing in children.
Sounds much more intentional than they were before.
That's right.
So we're really out of time, but I want to end with just one last question. Just you've kind of got so much insight and background on these issues. We very likely will have a new mayor come January. We're going to deal with all these issues. Any final thoughts for New York City, not just to kind of support the safety net, but to make sure we continue to make progress on mobility?
Yeah. I mean, I just think that mobility is such a local issue, right? And when I say local, I don't mean like the city of New York. I don't mean, the borough of Manhattan. I mean, who's growing up within a couple blocks around you, right? In New York, like no other place, you can find examples where literally crossing the street into a different type of development, I don't mean necessarily public housing, but just, crossing the street from one set of high-rise buildings to a more integrated kind of low-rise neighborhood can make all the difference. And so I think that obviously what's going on in the federal government right now is causing financial challenges, but I think that all the tools that you need to support mobility, it's about what's going on locally in a way that I think is actually incredibly well suited for a city government that's as resourced and as built out as New York. And so I don't want to understate the challenges, but I think that it's really a thing to lean into in these times of kind of increased focus on what's going on locally and maybe taking a step back from what's going on at the federal government level.
Well, I just want to say, we're going to stop, but I think this has been so fun and helpful, and I think it's actually really eye-opening. I don't know about all of you, but like I do work on this kind of stuff all the time, and I think the kind of research that you and your team have done around networks, around opportunity neighborhoods, I think are things that folks in city government aren't doing on a daily basis. I think it's not necessarily common knowledge that those are things that can make such a difference. And I think, as you point out, with all these kind of challenges we're facing, it's very encouraging to know that like kind of relatively small things can make a big difference. So anyway, thanks. It was a lot of fun and great having you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning. It's wonderful to see such a full room and such an engaged crowd. I am Dory Block. I'm senior editor at the Center for an Urban Future, and I am excited to share an idea with you this morning that touches upon several of the topics that we've been discussing. To get on the path to stable, family-sustaining jobs, many more working-age New Yorkers will need to access New York's high-quality career training programs with proven outcomes. That need is likely to surge as AI and automation reshape the labor market. But to make this possible, New York City needs to fix a fundamental shortcoming in its workforce system. Our most effective training programs typically serve just a few dozen to a few hundred people each year. These programs struggle to scale, not just due to limited public dollars, but because the funding model isn't designed to support outcomes-based growth. To say it differently, when a program is successful, there is no natural or incentivized path for it to serve more people. The need is daunting. Today, more than 1 million working-age New Yorkers are struggling with unemployment or underemployment. That's why we're calling on the next mayor to launch a career impact bond for New York City. This would be a revolving, outcomes-based fund that brings together public, private, and philanthropic capital to scale up the city's most effective training programs. New Jersey has already shown the way. Their Pay It Forward program provides zero-interest loans to cover tuition and living expenses. And when graduates land jobs paying over $50,000, they make income-based repayments that flow back into the fund to support future participants. Other places are doing this too. Massachusetts launched a Climate Careers Fund. San Diego is using a Pay It Forward model to expand its behavioral health workforce. And in San Antonio, a city-backed internship fund subsidizes intern wages. When employers hire candidates from the program, they also repay into the fund to support the next cohort of interns. Here in New York, the tech training nonprofit Pursuit has pioneered a similar model with impressive outcomes. Albany is now considering legislation to scale this statewide, but the mayor does not have to wait. New York City should act now, seeding a $25 million New York City Career Impact Bond and securing private matches from major employers, philanthropies, and impact investors. At a time when federal funding cuts are poised to create massive budget pressures on both the city and state, a public-private career impact bond offers a powerful way to generate new and recurring dollars to finance economic mobility while mobilizing private capital to help meet New York's growing workforce development needs. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Sirico, the Senior Fellow for Climate and Opportunity at the Center for an Urban Future. In today's New York, the path to the middle class almost always runs through a college credential or workforce training program. But every year, thousands of low-income New Yorkers drop out of CUNY or leave these programs before completing them, not because of tuition, which is often free or significantly reduced, but because of non-academic expenses that add up fast. Among those costs, the one that comes up more often than any other in our research is affordable public transit. Over half of all CUNY students live below the poverty line. Many received free Omni cards in high school, but that benefit vanishes the moment they enroll in college, even if their financial circumstances remain unchanged. Support programs like CUNY ASAP and ACE, which provide unlimited Omni cards to participants, have boosted graduation rates by nearly 40%. But most students are not enrolled in those programs, nor receive those same benefits. The same is true for workforce training participants. Fewer than 1 in 3 nonprofit programs can offer transit subsidies, even though most say that transportation is a key barrier to enrolling and then staying enrolled. The solution is simple. Provide a free, unlimited Omni card to every CUNY undergraduate student and participant of an evidence-based workforce training program. Now, to help pay for this crucial support, New York will need bold ideas that generate new revenue locally. One of the most promising opportunities to do so is to expand metered street parking and dedicate a portion of that revenue to funding this essential support. It might be hard to believe, but New York City has over 3 million on-street parking spaces, and only about 2.5% of them are actually metered. Charging for just a quarter of those spaces could generate $1.2 billion a year in new annual revenue. A fraction of that, just over $275 million, would cover unlimited Omni cards for every CUNY undergraduate student and tens of thousands of New Yorkers currently enrolled in career training programs. And that still leaves nearly $1 billion left over for street-level improvements, from making dangerous intersections safer and creating new public spaces, to building out EV infrastructure and expanding the city's outdoor dining and open streets programs. Not to mention that meters also lead to higher parking turnover, which benefits businesses and drivers alike. And also just mention that in most global cities, college students have some sort of transit discount. A free Omni card for New Yorkers pursuing education and training is a catalytic investment in economic mobility. Let's use one of the city's most underutilized assets, the curb, to make sure that more New Yorkers can not only get where they need to go, but also get ahead. Thanks.
Yes, welcome to the acoustic sessions. One thing I'll say just as we begin, if you just want to get those microphones nice and close to you, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and I think the audiences just want to make sure they can hear us. Well, welcome, everyone. Hello again, everybody. I'll give you one more good morning. Good morning, at least for the next few minutes. It's such a pleasure to conclude today's amazing event with 4 incredible speakers who are really doing the work on the ground in New York City, day in, day out, to help expand economic mobility. Their full bios are in your, if you scan those QR codes, you can see everything you need to know about these illustrious 4 folks. But I'll just mention briefly, we're joined today by Steve Colon, the CEO of Bottomline, Kirsten Barnett, the president and CEO of the New York Jobs CEO Council, LaShawn Ellen Mohammed, the CEO of the Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation, and Ruben Ogbonna, who leads the Marcy Lab School as a co-founder there. Welcome to the 4 of you, and join me in a quick round of applause for our concluding panel. So I wanted to begin, the 4 of you are here not because your organizations face the most dire threats from Washington, but really because your organizations are exactly what's working in New York City right now and elsewhere around the country to expand economic mobility, to help more New Yorkers who start their lives in a low-income family to be able to move into the middle class and achieve economic stability. And so that's why we wanted to conclude today's conversations by focused on what's actually working at the ground level, the nonprofits that are doing this work in New York City today. But we did want to begin by asking you all about these threats that we're seeing from Washington. And again, not only because of the potential impacts on your own organizations, but really specifically on the impact on economic mobility. So I wanted to open this up as a starting point for all four of you. When you think about whether that's the budget bill that just passed, policy changes that are already underway, or cultural shifts that are maybe making it more challenging, what do you all see as the biggest challenges that this moment now presents to New York when it comes to advancing economic mobility?
Are we going in a circle?
I'll let whoever wants to jump in, jump in.
Well, I'll start. As you said, Eli, and I just want to say thank you for the invitation to be here, to be a part of this amazing conversations that have been happening. I would say the main challenge that I'm seeing really is the fear that the bill or that these threats are presenting to community. And if you know anything about human development, if we're working around economic mobility, period, right, moving people forward, if people are stuck in fear, and that includes those policymakers, that includes other nonprofit leaders, if everyone is frozen and stuck in fear around what potentially is happening, then nothing moves forward. So I see that as the biggest challenge, to be honest.
I'll just jump into that. I think that's a great point. But in the also the strain it puts on the whole ecosystem. So whether we're not impacted because we're as an organization because we're not recipients of federal funding, but we don't operate in a vacuum. And so most of the participants in our programs, most of the students we work with, they are in some way relying on programs, subsidies, whatever it might be, that is being cut. And so I think that when you already have a system that's in so many ways underfunded and overworked, to add that strain, it's a distraction, it's a challenge, and then it's a real barrier to being able to take advantage of some of the other things that may not be actually impacted by the funding themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is, look, we've heard time and time again here from the first session that college degree is the most consistent, reliable way for students to find social and economic mobility. But what we've had, and it goes well past just January of this year, what we've had is several years of that being harder and harder, and a message going out to students that a college degree is not something that is valuable to them, that's not necessary anymore, that's something that's attainable to them. 2 years ago, we had the SCOTUS decision around the use of race in admissions. Last year, we had a complete debacle with FAFSA. This year, we have the big, beautiful bill cutting SNAP benefits for students. The FY26, president's sort of skinny budget for FY26 shows cuts in Pell, shows cuts in work study. What we are saying to young people all the time as professionals is how critically important higher education is to them, yet the ecosystem around them continues to demonstrate that that is not a possible pathway for them. And so we have these competing messages that our students are dealing with, and so that's why fear comes into play, that's why uncertainty comes into play, because we are doing our best to try to show them a pathway out of some of the situations that they're in, yet the system keeps erecting new and new barriers for them to traverse.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that was brought up here. It's like a trifecta of federal funding and policies that impact DE&I, AI. There are a number of things that are making the work of everybody up here really, really challenging. One thing that unites us is that everybody here is advocating on behalf of younger people, older folks looking to get into the workforce coming from historically marginalized communities, and we are often advocating in the private sector. The backlash or the complete pivot away from DE&I policies as entryways into the workforce has been critically challenging. I think all of us would say that as we market the constituents in our programs, we always lead with the quality of the talent, the rigor of the training, the business benefit of hiring from underlooked talent sources. And at the same time, DEI has been kind of like a counterbalance towards what John Friedman talked about, social capital. Yeah. Someone in a company willing to stick their name, their reputation on the line to open up a door for someone who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. And what we've seen over the past year is those advocates for our young people, people with titles like head of DE&I or early career from non-traditional pathways, they've been laid off, their positions have been pivoted away from, their budgets have been cut. And so that makes it that much harder for us to kind of reach the end goal, which is gainful employment.
I want to ask you all a little bit more about what is working right now. And I think policymakers need to understand what's working so that they can prioritize some of their investments. But I think, Kirsten, I'd like to start with you and come back to you, Ruben, just to begin, because you both run very specific programs or organizations, really, that have outcomes to share with policymakers that actually indicate what is helping to move the needle on upward mobility. So maybe, Kirsten, I'll start with you. Just for those that maybe still are unfamiliar with the work of the Jobs Council, from the perspective of demonstrating that upward mobility can be achieved, how do you help policymakers understand your impact? What are the keys to success?
Yeah, so I think John earlier made a really interesting point about, every city's different and sort of where they're struggling with this challenge. And I do think one of the great things about New York is we do have all these jobs. So we're not sitting here saying, oh, we wish you had great jobs. We also have all this talent. We're not saying if only everyone wasn't leaving and going to other cities like New York. So the problem, I think, we're one of the challenges that we've seen across the board is just what is that disconnect there? So you've got the people, and in many cases, you've already got the skills. I also think sometimes there's an overemphasis on they need skills. There's lots of people that already have the skills. And so I think one of the things we've seen work is it's a lot about awareness and access, but the awareness piece really can't be, I think, overemphasized enough. So whether that's awareness in high school around what are the different types of careers that are out there, also what are the ones that aren't going away, where is, and what are the skills, credentials that you need to get there so that you can start planning and making informed decisions going forward. Whether that's when you get to college or you land on a CUNY campus, someone telling you, by the way, if you want to work at, JP Morgan or a Google or any other large firm in 4 years, you need to be applying for an internship probably next year for 15 months out. I mean, there are just some it's both disappointing, but also in a way I'm optimistic because those are easier challenges to solve for, of just connecting to the on-ramps that exist than changing all of the on-ramps. And so while I also think that work is incredibly important, and we have seen our companies have had great success with apprenticeship programs, with hiring for 2-year degrees in roles they traditionally had hired for 4, with curriculum change, all of that work is important as well. But I do want to emphasize that one thing we've learned is there is some lower hanging fruit there, but it just hasn't been addressed enough, and that's connecting to the on-ramps that already exist.
That's great. Yeah, Ruben, I'd love to bring you back into.
Yeah, again, the question, like some of the things that we're seeing that are working. Just high level, the Marcy Lab School, we were founded in 2019, and we're building what we believe is an aspirational alternative to college, looking to serve young adults who recently graduated from high school, but due to financial reasons or a lack of belonging or lack of kind of direction, aren't seeing a pathway for them in the traditional higher education sector. They spend a year with us studying technical skills in computer science, data analytics, software engineering, and our kind of version of general ed, which we call leadership development. Our civic studies, race, identity, professional fluency. And what makes the program radical is that we then reach out to companies in the private sector that traditionally only hire college graduates and ask them to consider our students for roles as well. And graduates come out of our program and they work for many of the companies that are involved in the Jobs Council, the JP Morgans and New York Times of the world, but also city government and nonprofits. And their average salary is a little over $100,000 per year. They graduated 19, 20, 21 with no student loan debt. And the goal is to be able to scale the program and find kind of public and sustainable ways of funding it. And one of the things that have worked in this setting where we're seeing fluctuating demand from the private sector is going where the needs are. Over the past couple of years, we've piloted 2 kind of innovative pathways out of our software engineering pathway that traditionally places students into the tech names that you would recognize. One, we saw a need for computer science teachers and partnered with the NYC ETC on a grant funded by Google to train some of our graduates in teaching disciplines. And they're now working at public high schools, teaching computer science to students who look like them with pathways for advancement and continued growth. And it's been really cool to see as a former teacher myself. And then we went to the private sector and asked the question of where are you seeing unique demand amongst your technological needs. We partnered with a few companies, one of which is Mizuho, the Japanese bank whose headquarters is in U.S. headquarters is in Midtown. And we had a conversation with their CIO, and they laid out a case of these really unique kind of proprietary software that they use to manage their company's compliance and kind of KYC programs. They laid out this challenge of needing to pay mid-level engineers to essentially start at year 0 with these technologies presenting a bit of a business challenge. We crafted an apprenticeship program, training our software engineering graduates for this kind of hybrid finance compliance technology roles. And we're seeing strong retention, and we're seeing strong performance outcomes. And what we're hearing from the company is that it's a really strong ROI program because they're getting people from the ground up. And so by the time they get to 5 years, which they would typically be kind of pulling people into this program for, they have developed subject matter expertise. And so, it's a hard challenge because it requires us to have a lot of conversations with people that we typically weren't targeting in the early parts of our program. But going where the demand is, I think, is something that we're seeing is working.
Well, I love those two perspectives, and I want to bring you back in soon to ask about your recommendations for policymakers to actually advance that work. But I also want to bring Steve and LaShawn back in as well. And Steve, let me go to you on college. We've heard a lot about it today, not least of which from Chancellor King. New York City really has some alarming college attainment gaps. In East New York and in Brownsville, about 16% of working age adults have a college degree. A few blocks from here, it's 85%. And it's such a clear, there's such a clear correlation between the neighborhoods with high levels of college attainment and upward economic mobility. So I want to ask you, Steve, if the next mayor wants to be known as a champion of economic mobility and solving for the college access and success gaps is such a crucial part of that, what's your recommendation there? What can the city do in light of, the federal government shuttering the Department of Education or, changing the rules around Pell Grants? What's in the city's control that can actually help with this college attainment challenge?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of great programs. What we have found, and bottom line, we've been around for nearly 30 years now, and we help students get in, graduate, and then successfully launch a career. We are, aside from CUNY ASAP, which got the shout out earlier, we are one of only 2 organizations in the entire country that have an RCT, sort of like randomized control level proof, that our students graduate on 4 years. Our students are 13% more likely to graduate in 4 years. There are a host of great programs out there. What our students need most of all are consistent, caring, knowledgeable partners as they navigate the pathways to and through college, so that they can understand what is available to them, so they can understand how to address the barriers that might be in their way. And so my advice for the next mayor, or what I would ask the next mayor to do, is there are a wealth of nonprofit organizations that do quality work for these students that help students not just connect to college, but also present and get themselves through and earn a degree. And we should be finding more ways to do public-private partnerships. I've heard a lot about government is where they invest in what works. So I have an organization, we have an RCT, and what I would say to you is I've been underwhelmed by how much public dollars have been interested in funding what works, right? And so I think it's a great thing to say because there aren't a lot of organizations that actually have that depth of efficacy. And so like, philanthropy will fund you to try some innovative, and when it works, the federal government, local government will come in and help fund. That just hasn't happened. Right? And so the reality is, we will always rely on philanthropy, we'll always rely on public funds and a mixture of those things. And so if we can all just realize that we are actually part of the system, the nonprofits on this floor, on this stage and an audience, and treat us as such so that we have an equal opportunity to support students, because we're doing the work for the most part that many folks who are currently in the system either don't do or don't do well.
And just so folks, listening understand the scale here. How many New York City students are you able to work with in a typical year?
Well, I think all of us will tell you that a lot of that has to do with funding. What I would say is it cost us about $12,000 to get a student from high school to their first job. And bottom line, so that's 7 years worth of investment. Bottom line, students are graduating. 70% of them are gainfully employed within 6 months post-graduation. The average income is twice what their family income was when they started with us. So we are demonstrating social and economic mobility, and so our growth really is just, for us, what is sort of pausing our ability to grow is finding those public and private partnerships that allow us to grow as quickly as we can. We could work with as many students as we need to. What the reality is funding is a limitation for, and I would suspect that is true for everyone on this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Absolutely.
LaShawn, I want to bring you in and a little bit pivot toward the future. And I say that because in some ways, I think what you're building right now in Brownsville looks like the future. And I think there may be a lot of folks listening who may not know what you're doing with the Brownsville Hub, but I don't just want to kind of set you up to tell us in general, right? I'd love for you to kind of talk to us about if, let's say, the next mayor of New York City wants to make place-based investments in economic mobility, help more communities, and we've heard it several times today, we should help more New Yorkers move to even slightly higher opportunity blocks within their neighborhoods. There's value in that. But we've also got to make investments in making more neighborhoods places of opportunity. So help us understand, why is the Brownsville Hub designed to boost opportunity in the neighborhood? What does that look like? What do you see as the key components of achieving that?
Thank you, Eli. I love the setup. I want to start by, sharing that I serve as the executive director of Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation, which is a hyper-local, so I love that he talked about the local importance of local infrastructure building and organizations. Central Brooklyn EDC will be 36 years old in August, and it has only had 3 executive directors. I'm the 3rd. And so we are centered in Brownsville in the People's Republic of Brooklyn, if people do not know where Brownsville is. And I say that you may not know where it is because we talked about this. There's this map that is part of the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan that was produced about 4 years ago, and it talked about the next 100 years of economic development strategies in Brooklyn, and our neighborhood was left off the map. And so imagine, I pride myself in really being centered around economic mobility, not just because I grew up in public housing in Brownsville, but because I know it's what's right. And to look at a map and to think about, a future state, as you mentioned, and to not see an entire community on a map is just devastating. So what we are building in Brownsville is the neighborhood's first trade school. We don't, it's interesting, Brownsville also doesn't have a standalone high school, a traditional high school. So when you look at, for those who still have children, young children, and you look in a high school book and you look, for basic 9 through 12 high schools, Brownsville does not have one. So this is a community with over 100,000 people, despite what you see on the census, in the community with a large number of young people, youth and young adults in this community, who go to high school, but to your point, haven't been able to achieve some not even a high school diploma, but then also going on to the next step to college. So. Knowing that, I felt it was necessary, along with my colleagues, to create the neighborhoods, not just the trade school, but also a business center. Because in Brownsville, we have 2 main business corridors. And right before the pandemic, the Pickens Avenue Business Improvement District produced a commercial district needs assessment. And it showed how much money is spent by people who live in the community, right, or in the district. And in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, $1.53 billion is being spent on goods and services. So that told us that there is money here, right? So I think that it's important, future state, that we build institutions, not just programs, right? Institutions is what has and will continue to sustain neighborhoods. It will provide a place, a staple in a community where its neighborhood, its residents will be able to come to get poured into, to get support, to get investments. And I really want to highlight the importance of investing in people and not just buildings. That's how we approach community development, is people and things.
That's great, LaShawn. Well, that really tees us up to talk a little bit more about what this agenda should look like. And I'd like to spend the limited time we have left putting ideas out there for whoever's in office in January, the mayor, the city council, and for the state. Kirsten and Ruben, you were talking about, I think, 2 sides of kind of a scale-up challenge. Part of it is, how do we help a lot more employers plug in when we know that one of the biggest challenges is not we need to build whole new programs from scratch, but how do we connect the dots between the employers and the infrastructure we've got? And Ruben, you're sort of talking about a similar challenge, but also that very much, I think, includes a financial challenge. We've got a model that's working. Your graduates are earning $100,000 a year, but it's not cheap. It's not something that a $1,900 WIOA training grant from the federal government can pay for. So how can the next mayor scale up more of what's working, get more employers involved, help Marcy Lab succeed in your vision, Ruben, of helping more people? But Steve and LaShawn, I want to ask you the same question. One thing that the next mayor can run with that would accelerate or advance economic mobility in your world.
I mean, I'll jump in. I think there is a real opportunity anytime when your budgets are constrained to just look holistically at sort of where can you trim duplicative efforts and where can you build on what's already existed. Too often do we see, thinking about just through an employer lens, the number of times our employers are approached about, oh, if only we knew the skills we were looking for, if only we had a new committee to come together to talk about the jobs. I mean, there is so much of that work that's already out there, and there are employers ready and waiting that have already done it, and so I think that being more thoughtful across the system about where can you reallocate resources at this time is a good opportunity, and to put some more sustainable processes in place. To your point that it can't just be programs, if you have more sustainable processes that are standard on how you have education and business connected regularly. So there's a consistent feedback loop so that as the jobs are changing real time, you're getting that signal in your education and training programs. The benefit, again, that New York has that so many other cities don't is they're right here. You have every industry here. You have leaders across every industry here, and they're willing and ready to lean in and help. But we don't have a formal system that really takes advantage of that, and I think that's an opportunity to do that now. And that's a low cost, compared to other things, solution. And the other piece I would say is to make it as easy as possible for businesses to engage. And that does include being thoughtful about what the asks are of business, of really centralizing those asks, but making it easy for employers to plug in to what's working. And we have some great proof points there. You look at we have employers across industries, 27 companies. They've hired 9,000 CUNY students into jobs over $70,000 over the past 4 years. I mean, that's a great number, but also, we have Google. Google can hire 100 interns next year, but they also could train 100,000 CUNY students with AI Google Essentials. And so thinking about those asks of employers, not just as what does success look like by what are your jobs that you have, like where can we send people through your doors, but also what are the resources you have, what is it that you do as a core business that you're willing to do with the community, particularly when it's for free. This is the time to really be thoughtful about those asks and take advantage of those.
I'm actually going to go in a different direction. I think, yes, funding the work of programs like this, I think really important. I'll talk about AI just for a moment because I'm sure every panel this has probably come up. But like this is a moment. I think we take for granted how much things can change during like a 4 or 5 year technological window. But if you think about like where the world was in 2008 versus where it was in 2013. What type of phone you had in 2007 versus what most people had in 2013, the companies that weren't around then versus the companies that were prolific by 2013, and then how that began to trickle down to the public school system, to all aspects of government and different institutions. We're in a moment right now, and it's really unfortunate that the inflection point for AI is happening during this period in the economy and this period in national politics. But here we are. Yeah. And the challenge is things are moving really quickly. We have time, but not a lot of it. And I think one of the things that is both somewhat of a scary challenge and an opportunity is that we have to be about the business of preparing the workforce now and the future workforce for what it will look like in the future, but no one knows what it will look like. And colleges alone won't be prepared to adapt as quickly as what needs to happen. And so when I think about programs like Bottom Line or non-college programs like the Marcy Lab School, like we're gonna play a critical role in kind of the last mile of what happens post-college or what happens prior to landing a job. And so I think there is a really strong government imperative if we care about New York City's workforce to make sure that young people are prepared for what's to come. And then at the same token, it's really challenging that right now AI is hitting this inflection point when the stock market is rewarding cutting costs. And we're in a moment of where economic contraction. And so the whole narrative is AI is taking jobs. But that's just a reflection of where we are right now in this economy. It's crazy to think about what could be true if we were in a different moment in time where companies were rewarded for growth and expansion. Because then the narrative would be AI is the bastion for a whole new set of services, products, and features that like we always wish for. And we know that that's not going to be the narrative in the private sector right now, but that could be the narrative in the public sector. And so I think it could be an opportunity for city government, the next mayor, to say, like, what are all the city services that, like, we wouldn't be able to staff right now with people, but we could bring in technologists to begin piloting what this could look like for the future.
You want me to go first? Sure. So many thoughts are running through my mind, but I will say that, one, I would love for the next mayor, whomever it might be, to truly understand and dive deep into every single facet of this city, right? To truly understand what exists, right, as you stated, and make sure that there's equity. It sounds simple, but like the disparities that exist between neighborhoods, and that's why I love so much what John, when he talked about like the immediate blocks. I don't believe we necessarily have to integrate other income levels into certain neighborhoods if we solved for poverty. Mm-hmm. Why would we not look at where the most impoverished neighborhoods are in the city of New York and go to work to make sure that we we move the needle? I mean, I think, it sounds simple, but I think that is really something that the next mayor should truly consider. Also, because I keep going back to this map, thinking about people who are in place who are not really informed. I don't think a lot of decisions are made maliciously. I just think that people are unaware. People don't know what they don't know. But if you have representation from different neighborhoods, right, councils that are made up of people who have a lived experience that can truly inform the mayor about what should be happening, where resources are truly needed, I think that would make a significant difference. And lastly, again, just going back to the last panel or conversation, I'm also not a fan of guaranteed basic income, right? Direct cash infusion for a certain amount of time does not work. But what is guaranteed basic income is literally the work that you all are doing, that we all are doing, right? If you even look at the institutions in our communities, right? We've done some research around how many people who live in our community are actually employed with the largest employers. Our local hospital, less than 10% of the people who live in the district work at the hospital. And in Brownsville, I don't know if you all know this, we have the largest concentration of public housing in the world. Only 8 people from public housing worked in the hospital. I mean, these disparities are just staggering. So if we just took a look at literally, right, do some mining and find where the opportunities are, right in every neighborhood's backyard, I think we would really solve a lot of challenges.
That's great, Michelle. Thank you.
This microphone bugs me out. I feel like I should have an acoustic guitar. I'm in a real realist moment right now, given everything that's going on at the federal level, and what I suspect, and we've heard it mentioned a few times, it's going to be really hard for the city from an economic perspective over the next at least few years. And I think higher ed is going to get hit really hard. We're talking about a reduction in the Pell Grant. We're talking about almost an elimination of federal work study. Where in the president's skinny budget, we're talking about a zeroing out of Gear Up, of TRIO, of AmeriCorps, programs that are essential. We've talked about the SNAP cuts and other cuts that are potentially coming down the road. And so the thing I want most for the next mayor to do is guarantee the pearl of this city, and the pearl of this city is CUNY. And how affordable it is for students to get a degree in this city. And what we cannot do is try to balance the budget, our city's budget, on the backs of those institutions. And so my plea to them is to ensure that remains the affordable option that it currently is for our students, because that is our pathway out. To cut funding from CUNY is to basically say we don't care about the future of this city. Right? And so for me, that is it. That is all of I +1 all of this stuff, but college affordability is the largest barrier to economic and social mobility.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Well, I want to turn over to our audience for some questions from them as well. I think I've got at least a couple more for all of you, but let's open it up to our audience for a little bit and I'm sure folks have questions and thoughts. Yeah, so I'll call on some folks and the microphones will come. Just let us know your name, who you're here with. Please keep your questions brief. We'll get to as many as we can.
Hi, my name's Alessandra Serrano. I'm a recent CUNY graduate from John Jay. Just finished last summer my degree in applied mathematics and data science.
Oh.
I am a single mother, and if it wasn't for CUNY, I wouldn't have been able to, reach that next step. But my question for you really is, where can I go right now with my skills? In my free time, I go to hackathons. I build things with AI directly related to New York City. For instance, I just created this app that allows people to, they're able to speak to the app in their native language, and if they are a parent, for instance, and they want to get a better sense of where their kid is going to school, maybe they need to be able to get their kid into a certain disability program that's only available in a certain district or something. They can interact with the AI, and it's brought back to them in their language so they can see it displayed and be able to, get those resources. And someone put me in contact to come here to be able to just speak about what I do, because I'm doing this all on my own in hackathons that are business related. They don't really care about my initiatives. And I work part-time as an ABA therapist, and I work part-time at a startup as an AI developer. And I'm also a PTA treasurer that just got elected for my daughter's school. I don't want to put my talent into any other person's pocket besides the city. I was born and raised here. My kid is raised here. So I want to know where I can go right now with my skills. That's it, because you guys talk a lot about education and bridging the gap, and I need to bridge that gap for myself, and I don't want to. I'm applying to Anthropic, all of these big corporations, but my heart is here.
I mean, it sounds like the city could use your talent to start that.
It's a solution. I want to be able
And your
to
solution,
help
yes.
Michelle be able to make those connections where you see only 8 people working from your district at the biggest hospital. That's crazy. And that's not the only story that's out there, but uncovering that is data.
There are many. So as someone building a trade school and a business center, I'm like, you're the business. You don't need to go anywhere. You have everything. What you need is someone to pour into you so that you can create your business, that you can maybe work in subcontract until you get more experience. But you're right, the city needs your services. The New York City Department of Youth and Community Development is a large youth-serving institution in the city, right, agency. Imagine you have a contract to teach that across all after-school programs in the city. There's so many opportunities. This didn't come up, but relationships. This is another reason why we're seeing the many gaps that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's who you know, right? And everyone knows that saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But it's also who knows you. That's the part people don't tell you.
Oh, absolutely.
Network.
Yes. No, and so I want to leave space, but please, I will help as much as I can to give you information.
I was struggling through my degree because I was raising a small daughter.
Yes.
I left school with no internship, and I spent 6 months just sitting at home being like, how do I get a job? I'm just applying into the biz, not hearing anything. Luckily, I found a co-op fellowship that is directly for first-generation students that give if you have anyone that you know that's a first-generation student is struggling to find work, please recommend them a co-op fellowship. They gave me 400 hours of training, networking, which allowed me to build the skills to get myself in the
So I'm going to jump in so we can get some more questions. But I love the question. I love the plug for Co-op Careers, great organization. And there's so much more we could talk about, but I want to hear more from our audience. So yeah, Mr. Microphone's coming around. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Erin McFadden. I work with Brooklyn Org, among other organizations, as a nonprofit consultant. And one of the things I think I'm consistently hearing in this panel and this general conversation this morning is how education is so tied to economic mobility. But we're also talking about outcomes, what are the outcomes that we are trying to optimize for and measure by. And it strikes me that one of the most important things that public education does is create a shared civic experience. And I don't think I've heard a lot about that as an outcome that we need to integrate into how we build these future programs and preserve the ones that we have. And I would love to hear from any and all of you about how we, build the alignment that we've been talking about this morning, not only for the economic reasons we go to school and get educated, but also the civil society reasons that we do that, and how this is a shared public good.
If I can just jump in there, I just want to say one thing, what your first comment around that education is so critical. It's more, education can be so critical. And I do think that's an important distinction of what we're talking about, is that it's not a given that students get education and are going to get a good job, to your point. You have to be able to find the resources, you have to be on the right path, you have to have the skills. I do think civic education is an incredibly important part of that, and there should be more of that in our public school system. But I think that that's just one piece of the puzzle when we're talking about skills that people need to be successful.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about those things. I talk about the work that we do. The reality is when most of the time when I'm out talking about our work, right, I'm trying to get an investment in the work that we're doing, and the reality is that the corporations who give us dollars or the public entities are trying, right, what they want to know is how many students graduated, how many students got a job, what was their salary, what was the tax base. So I think I'll use an I statement here. I have been so automated into the brass tacks of what these regions do, but we've seen it all along. There is a great program. I don't like to shout them out that often, but the College Board has a. Forgive me, I apologize. But they have a research component called 5 Ways Education Pays. It's all about the civic, not just sort of the financial benefits, but the civic advancements. And I often refer back to that, things like healthier lifestyles and more civic engagement. And those are the things I think are really critical. We just, at least from my perspective, it's not the thing that most folks who are willing to help partner with us are really focused on at that moment.
Although I do think when business leaders are disappointed in elections, it's an incentive for them to get more focused on it. So just
yes, that thing.
Thank you for that. Yes, more questions, microphones on both sides. We'll go right there, 5th, 6th row. Yep, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Regina Arrington, and I am with the Clinton Foundation. I want to thank you all for your time and invite you to the Clinton Global Initiative. We're having something during UN General Assembly Week, and your information has been invaluable. We're actually shifting the way that we convene to be focused on solutions, which we've not typically done. But in thinking about solutions, I want to say the elephant in the room to me, we're not talking about racism or the lack of equity in what we now have to design somehow, magically. And a lot of these programs have been successful on their face, but when it comes to racial gaps, they continue to exist. Now we're in a time where we can't say diversity, equity, or inclusion. We can say Title VII and Title IX, we love that. So knowing that we are currently in a place where integration is even harder to make happen, it wasn't successful the first time. It honestly dragged down the African American community enormously, economically, and in terms of education. That is not a well-known fact, but that is the outcome of integration. How do we get to a place where all of these things we're creating are actually supporting all the people in the country? And how do we stay safe and keep our funding while not missing the truth of the gap in this country is inextricably tied to race?
So so I didn't explicitly say it in that way, but that is exactly what I was talking about. When I mentioned the neighborhood, which is, Brownsville and East New York, pretty much, we have the largest population of Black and Brown residents, right? And so thinking about a city planning map that's completely, talk about erasure, right? So that's why I brought it up in this forum, and then also talked about what the next mayor could do. And so if we really focus on hyper-local neighborhoods, that is dealing with race. That is because if we truly know and understand who's where, right, and we make sure there's equity across the city, that's how you deal with it, right? So and then that also kind of checks the box, but you don't really have to say the word because you're just doing the work. So that's my answer to that.
Yeah, that's a big question, and I know that you know this, Regina. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like the leaders that we look to from the previous generation of civil rights activists and movements that our young people study in school that have been whitewashed a bit now. Like, we know that those leaders were legal scholars, they were comms strategists, nothing was accidental. All of it was intentional. And I take that to mean in moments like today, the work has to continue and we have to be equally as strategic in how we navigate today's climate. But it also means that we have to keep the main thing at the center.
Yeah.
It reminds me of your question about civic studies. And I think, LaShawn, you had the bar of the day that we're trying to build institutions, not programs. That is a bar. And I think building institutions means that, you know, we have to navigate the funding ecosystem, and like we know what gets funded in this moment. But being proximate leaders, folks who are deeply, you know, connected to the communities that we're serving, there are a whole separate set of conversations and programming that are happening either explicitly on the scope and sequences or in the classrooms of the teachers and program leaders that we hire. When we founded the Marcy Lab School, it was really critical for us to be direct about conversations about race, class, gender, ethnicity, because, you know, when our programs work, all of ours, we're putting people into new social ecosystems. And I think in today's world, it's really important that they have a set of mental models, language to describe what it is that they're experiencing. Because the way gaslighting works is, you know, the world will make you think that you're crazy.
Right.
And, you know, all that to say, I think the work is more important than ever now, but it's incumbent upon us to be really thoughtful and strategic about how we do it.
I also think we need to remember that, and I agree 100%, and I think we need to remember how much we're asking our nonprofit communities to do in this moment in time. Even today we heard, and nonprofits need to organize and advocate more. At the same time, we're doing our programming. At the same time, we've got staff that we're trying to take care of. At the same time, I'm trying to help my staff understand what happens if ICE walks into our building. Like, there is give me a broom and I'll sweep up on the way out too. There is an endless supply of things that we as nonprofit leaders are being asked to navigate and manage, and we'll do it. We're going to do it, but to do it well and to effectuate it well, sometimes we're going to have to say, low-income communities, wink, wink, we know who we're talking about. First-generation students, wink, wink, we know who we're talking about, right? And know that our focus is our focus. We know what we're doing. We're working with the communities that need us. We work in certain communities, and it's because we're navigating, I think, in some cases, more than our fair share of challenges as organizations who are trying to get, for at least in my instance, very young first or second job out of college students to do really, really critical work with high school and college students. So,
yeah. That's great. Thank you for the question. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. We'll go to Andrew over there. Oh, yeah. And then in the
Hi.
back.
Sorry, I have the mic. I'm going to take precedence with the mic.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, my name's, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. My name's Amber Briggs. I'm the Director of Programs for New York City for Junior Achievement. It's Ruben. Ruben, this is specifically for you. Your take on AI is the best presented I have ever heard that.
Thank you.
Truly, if you haven't, you should write an op-ed. Because I am fearful of what's happening in entry-level work. I work on the workforce side. We're training people for jobs and in companies that are cutting the workforce, and I think that has been placed a lot on education and not on the workforce, and your take on it is that truly I write an op-ed. I do have a question to your proposal around, well, we have an opportunity to leverage this differently in the nonprofit or government space. Thinking about the workforce reductions at the government level, my fear is that funding, when it comes back, if it comes back, there will be pushback or resistance to reinvesting in ways so that, in the human piece of it, that's what I really worry about. And so your take on it, if we have an opportunity, how do we do that well in human investing with I think about funders like philanthropy, Robin Hood, people who have a lot of money. It's going to be hard to say, well, we need to hire people again for these jobs so that we can create these problems. Just curious.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those kind words. I really appreciate it. I think one of the opportunities is AI kind of moves everything up the stack, as they say in the tech sector, meaning that everybody can do a little bit more with less. And so my friend who started us off, LaShawn said it, I see an opportunity for smaller organizations to have like technologists embedded that can do what previously it would have taken a small team to do. It's like, we're a 25-person team at Marcy. And so like in no circumstances would it make sense for us to have a tech department or IT department. But as this technology progresses, if we hired one person like you with your background, like all of these ideas that our teachers had, like, I wish I had an automated grading system. I wish I had a platform for someone to be able to do mock interviews and record a video and had it graded. I wish I had someone who can scrape the data from the city and help me find these services that our students need. Like, those are programs or challenges right now that will require a small team or the offshore contracting, but as this technology advances, one really well-equipped person with enough ingenuity can make really incredible things happen. And so I do hope that even though budgets are being cut, if like the right agencies or the right organizations can begin to pilot and experiment and bring these things in-house and just demonstrate what's possible with like, small teams leveraging this technology, as the circumstances in the ecosystem, the market turns around, we'll be in a position to ask for more of that.
That's right. Great, thank you. I think I have time for that one last question. Bring the mic up. Oh, thank you. Yeah, just bring it back.
Hi, Andrew Tian with Pursuit. Very fortunate to get to partner with a number of you. AI is something we also, as a frontline organization, training and placing low-income New Yorkers into tech jobs are confronting. And this has been such a good conversation, but I think many of us are in the field know workforce development, how fragmented things are. Kirsten, you brought up a really good point in this budget-constrained time about avoiding duplication. So what I'm thinking about is mobilizing and how we can get prescriptive and different with private sector. In particular, I think the foundational LLM AI companies who are, on the one hand, developing the technology, I think also starting to acknowledge their responsibility in the space. Interesting announcement, last week in terms of OpenAI and Microsoft and Anthropic around training teachers. This is a time where we do need to think differently. We have a new mayor coming in. What could we ask of these companies? Not just dollars, but that might be a good starting point. But yeah, maybe thinking differently. Do you have any ideas that we can propose to them and also bring them into this future roadmap? Thank you.
I think, so we're an organization, we have a couple of different pilots going on around AI and how we want to integrate in our system in the not AI or humans, but AI and humans together doing the work. I think the biggest thing that we face is it's a talent challenge, right? So I can go and I can secure the resources to try to pilot something, but there's just not enough people.
There's a lot of us.
Yeah, and it's hard for us to find, and it's hard for us to afford, right, those individuals, because we're competing with for-profit agencies to do that, to get those access. And so like my request of private industry is to share talent with us. We need people with that know-how who can come into our organizations and help us design. We know what we need to get done. We know how we want it to operate. We understand the business requirements, if you will. We often don't have the technical capabilities to do it on our own. And when we do, it is at astronomical prices. And so like for us, what I would really love to see is a deeper investment from the tech community of working with nonprofits to help us solve some of the capability issues we have around getting technology infrastructure up and running. I'm doing a simple transition of Salesforce from one instance to another, and I'm $1 million in, right? And so like, how do we do this in a way that is affordable and attainable to organizations that may have 27 people working in them?
I think there's one other side of the AI coin, and it's not the experts like you who are building innovative solutions, but those who are going to have to work alongside them.
Yep.
And so I do think that's another opportunity where the big companies, to your point, recognizing an importance to lean into the community and to provide those skills, even if it's not the people that are going to be working on the build. This impacts every job. And so I think making sure that the CUNYs, the New York City public school systems, the existing systems out there, that they are baking this into their own training is a place that private sector employers can lean in, and in a way that involves not having to build new programs.
Yeah.
All right, one thing I'll add too is that it's going to be important, and this is some of the models that we employ, is creating a sort of like a coalition, like industry partners, public, private sector, community. It's really important for everyone to be at the same table, creating like the framework. And so one of the things that we're working on with the school district, we're in School District 23, is helping the administration develop a cradle to career initiative. And so an industry partner, like the company you named or that you work for, could be a really instrumental component to that, right? Because if we start creating opportunities for younger people, right, early childhood, elementary school, to gain those skills in that, at their level, we wouldn't even be having these conversations
That's
about
right.
what the workforce looks like, or, maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So I also think that's an important component to consider.
Ruben, I'd normally let you get the last word, but we're over time, so can you all join me in giving a big round of applause? What a great panel, by the way. Thank you all. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. I want to thank all of you for attending today. Another big thanks to the Robin Hood Foundation for making today possible. I want to make sure all of you know that we published this report today with 5 ideas for expanding economic mobility. We delivered pitches with them, but you can check out the report on our website, nycfuture.org. Also, I wanted to say that since there's so many great nonprofits in the room today, we are working on a report right now. We're just getting started about trying to document some of the specific challenges that nonprofit organizations around the cities are facing with respect to federal policy and federal budget cuts. And so if you'd like to talk to us, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to kind of document the issues that you're facing. So just reach out and let us know. But anyway, thanks so much for coming and have a great day.